Hello friends, I'm a storyteller and today I'm here to share with you real scary stories, so you can relax and fall asleep. But before you start, hit like and subscribe to the channel. So every night, I tell you a new story, slow, scary, and very real. And where are you from? And what time is it now? Join me in finding peace in this darkness. Sit comfortably and relax. Tonight, the air is like a thick fog, covering the whole space. I'm sitting in my little house, with a flickering porch light. Everything was so quiet, there was only the sound of rain falling. The raindrops falling on the eaves made me feel like they were beating along with my heart. But tonight, things were something different. My house is located in the middle of a quiet suburban neighborhood. A small trail and fences surround the garden. I always feel safe here, where the only sound is the blowing wind and the sound of rustling leaves at night. But today, everything has changed. A strange sound rang out, not from the garden, but from my porch. The steps were slow and purposeful, as if someone was deliberately walking across the wooden planks on the porch. I could hear each step clearly. At first, I thought I just heard it wrong, but no, there were those footsteps again, clearer, closer. My heart was pounding in my chest. That vague feeling cannot be fully described in words. A feeling of not being able to breathe, as if the space around me was being compressed, as if something was coming very close. Someone outside is watching me, and this is not normal. I tried to regain my composure, walked closer to the window, and peeked out through the crack. But there is only darkness, and in that darkness, something is lurking. Something vague, impossible to see clearly, but making me feel extremely scared. Suddenly, I felt something, standing and looking at me, right there, where the darkness could not be lifted. Unable to bear it any longer, I opened the door and went out. The streetlight was dimly illuminated, just enough to see the silhouette of a person, but it wasn't a person. That figure was tall, blurry, like an unclear shadow, but there was something extremely still. My eyes tried to focus, but when the light turned on, the figure disappeared. Only the swaying bushes remained, even though there was no wind. The next day, I told my friend about what I saw. But I couldn't lie to myself that it was just an illusion or a coincidence. I felt like something wasn't right, like I was being watched, like there was something out there that always knew where I was. The following nights, I couldn't fall asleep easily. Every creak of the old wooden planks made my whole body stand up. Those sounds, every time they rang out, made me rush out of bed, my heart pounding in fear. I was sure I heard footsteps on the porch again. But when I picked up the porch light and walked out, there was nothing but the emptiness of the front yard. The only thing left in the air was an oppressive silence, as if everything around was holding its breath, waiting for something unknown to happen. Time passed, and the figure I saw that day did not appear again. A small part of me began to hope that maybe everything I had experienced was just a fantasy, a strange vision that had passed. But then, a week later, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by another sound. This time, the sound sounded like claws or fingernails scratching on a wooden board. I cringed in horror, my mouth instantly going dry. My mind skipped a beat, and my body suddenly felt frozen. In a panic, I groped for the flashlight on the nightstand, but my hands were shaking so much that I dropped it on the floor. I tried to turn it on, and as the weak light pierced the darkness, I could feel my breathing clearly echoing in the unbelievably quiet room. That period of time seemed to last forever, as each breath I took sounded like a reminder that I might not be alone in this house. That scratching sound, previously clear, was now silent. I tried to gather all my courage and gently opened the door to go out, but when I stepped out, everything seemed normal. The wooden planks were undamaged, with no signs of any creature or intruder. But something was wrong, the air was thick and stuffy, as if I was entering a different space, no longer the world I knew. I suddenly remembered an old story someone told, that the main character in the story always felt a pair of eyes following him. At first, I thought it was a cliché, but now I don't think so anymore. There was a very strange feeling, as if someone was watching me from some hidden location. I can picture the shadowy figure of someone, hiding behind the fence, waiting. But waiting for what? And why? The next morning, I resolved to face my growing paranoia. I must find the truth, whatever it is. I walked around the yard, looking for footprints. When I say footprints, I don't just mean a shoe print or an animal's tracks. I wanted to find something explainable, a clear sign, so I could confirm that it was all just my imagination or, if not, that some human or monster was haunting me. And then I found something. There were a few faint marks on the ground, leading from the sidewalk to the porch. They looked very strange, almost elongated, but not so distorted that one could claim to be the mark of a large boot. These footprints trace a path up to the porch, then around a support beam, before disappearing right between the wooden planks. There was no sign of continuation, just a strange interruption. It was as if that guest, or something, had lifted himself off the ground. When I think about that, my stomach cramps, it feels like a cold invades me from the inside out. I tried to tell myself that it was just a trick of the light, or maybe an incomplete print of the objects in the yard. But in the back of my mind, I knew these reasonable explanations were slowly slipping away. And from that moment on, my night was never the same again. Instead of falling asleep peacefully, I lay awake, my ears listening to every creak of objects in the house, the cracking of tree branches in the yard, or some soft moan that I couldn't explain. Another strange thing was the silence outside. Not just ordinary silence, but a terrifying kind of silence, as if everything around was holding its breath, not daring to make any sound. Those nights, I sometimes get up and look through the curtains, scanning the yard for any movement. The street lights now seem to flicker more frequently, not because of a natural change in the lights, but as if something was making them wobble. Or maybe I'm just becoming more aware of its every fluctuation, every little detail that I previously overlooked. The shadows in the yard also changed, but were always just outside my vision. Every time I tried to focus on them, they disappeared, as if someone was playing with me, only reappearing when I couldn't see clearly. One night, in the weak light of a street lamp, I caught a glimpse of a shape near the bushes. The figure was low, as if crouching, like a ghost waiting. My throat was tight, my heart was beating so hard that I could clearly feel every beat in my body. I can't breathe. My eyes squinted, trying to find any detail, a body part, a limb, a face. But the thing was just a dark, irregular shape, like a twisted branch or a hunched figure. The longer I looked, the more I felt it was staring at me, like an invisible eye was observing my every move. My mind screamed at me, telling me to back away, turn off the lights, and do anything other than stand there. But I couldn't move. My whole body felt frozen, my legs felt heavy and I couldn't move. Cold sweat ran down my temples, I felt a chill spread throughout my body. It felt like hours passed before the shape finally receded into the darkness, and as soon as it disappeared, the tension in my body slowly released. But that release only made me tremble uncontrollably, as if my entire body was reacting to a sudden feeling of fear. By the time dawn broke, I felt exhausted, not only physically but also mentally. Feeling tired, sleepy, and stressed made me begin to doubt my sanity. I wondered if these visions were really happening or if I was just trapped in some kind of inexplicable, intense hallucination. Maybe I was too obsessed with some intruder, a random intruder, and created strange stories in my head. But even as I tried to rationalize everything, the emptiness in my mind made me believe that something mysterious, something unexplainable, was out there. The footsteps that suddenly ended, the scratching sound on the porch, the unusual presence outside the fence. These were not the actions of an ordinary trespasser. This feeling is so different. And deep inside, I knew that there was something bigger, something darker waiting for me. One day, I decided to share my story with a neighbor. I was shaking, trying to express that I had heard strange noises at night. The neighbor seemed half worried, half confused, then thought it might just be a raccoon or some other wild animal. I nodded politely, but I couldn't believe that explanation. Even though I tried to tell the truth, my voice still sounded hesitant, as if I didn't fully believe what I was saying. The strangeness of the story made me feel like someone who was trying to get rid of a fear, but was unable to do so. I secretly hoped that sharing this story with others would help ease my feelings of fear, but in reality, it only served to highlight my loneliness in facing this fear. Feeling like I'm trapped in a lonely universe, where no one can understand or help. A few more nights passed, and everything was the same: the heavy silence, the intense tension spreading through every joint, the subtle but unmistakable feeling that he was being watched. I could feel some presence, just outside, but couldn't see clearly. Then one evening, I heard that scratching sound again, but this time it was different. The sound was more intense, unlike the previous times. It was like something was trying to get under the wooden planks on the porch. My skin pricked at the urgency of that sound. It feels like something is getting closer, trying to penetrate my space. Instead of rushing out the door like usual, I just stood still in the house, pressing my ear against the board, trying to hear what that creature was doing, what it planned to do next. I could feel vibrations from the floor, vibrations so strong that they seemed to be spreading throughout the space. Panic filled my body, each heartbeat felt like it was about to rip through my chest. My body felt frozen, unable to move, even though I wanted to do something. The rush of adrenaline made me feel like I couldn't breathe. My lips were dry, and the taste of copper in my mouth made me feel extremely stressed. I thought about calling the police, but then I asked myself, what would I say? How can I explain that something invisible is crawling around my porch at night? And as I thought about that, the scratching suddenly stopped, leaving an uneasy silence, as if something had disappeared, or was waiting in the darkness. Maybe an hour has passed, or just 5 minutes. Time became meaningless in my panicked state. Every second passed like a century, and I couldn't determine what was going on in that space. Finally, I dared to open the door, with my heart pounding in my chest. The night was as always, dark, silent and empty. But there was something different in the air, a heavy feeling, as if the darkness was not simply a lack of light, but something alive, watching me. My flashlight passed over the wooden panels of the porch, and I suddenly noticed deep gouges in the wood, marks that couldn't have been accidental. They looked like claw marks, each about an inch or two long, penetrating deep into the wood, creating strange shapes I had never seen before. Terror rose in my heart, a feeling that cannot be described in words. But then, as the light shined toward the bushes, I saw it, that shape had returned. A faint black streak, hidden in the darkness, almost unnoticeable, but making me feel like my heart was choking. It didn't make a sound, didn't have any obvious movements, just subtle changes. I could feel it looking back at me. My heart was pounding in my chest. I slammed the door shut, unable to bear that presence another second. Standing dumbfounded for a moment at the door, my hand tightly grasped the doorknob with cold sweat. After that, I hastily locked it, but even that didn't give me the slightest bit of peace of mind. The security I thought I had in this house is now gone. I turned on every light in the house, trying to chase away the darkness that surrounded me. The lamp in the living room cast a harsh light on the wall, highlighting my loneliness, a distinct loneliness as I stood there, completely unable to escape. My mind was spinning with thoughts. Should I leave? Should I stay up all night, without sleep, without rest? Or can I face it? These questions kept circling in my head, but there were no clear answers. Sleep is impossible. Every time I close my eyes, I see that silhouette behind my eyelids, that shadowy black shadow, seemingly always there, always by my side. I felt its claws clawing at my consciousness, tearing away every conscious thought I had left. I kept imagining the wood cracking, and something slithering underneath, coming closer to me. My reason began to crumble, replaced by a primal fear that I couldn't control. Every noise in the house startled me. Every shadow, every small movement outside the window becomes a potential threat. I had never felt so vulnerable, right in my own home, the place I thought was safe. Desperate, I spent the next day reinforcing my awning. I pounded down any loose boards, trying to tighten everything up so there was no way in. I even spread a light layer of flour dust on the steps, hoping to record clearer footprints should the entity return. But no matter what I do, I feel like all my efforts are in vain, because I know something dark is always waiting in the darkness, right under my feet. My nerves were tense the whole time, every minute felt like a challenge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain that I would see that vague figure lurking across the street, in the thick darkness. The weak sunlight filtered through the window, shining on my skin, but even though there was light, it didn't seem to be able to dispel the fear embedded deep in my bones. Night fell again, and like an endless loop, fear returned, weighing heavily on me. I sat by the window, turned off the light, trying to stay calm to observe, but the tension in my body was uncontrollable. The flower on the porch gave off a dim glow under the porch light, but the surrounding darkness made the air thick and stuffy. Around midnight, the wooden boards on the porch creaked again. My lungs were constricted, as if I couldn't breathe in that moment. It happened again, soft footsteps, then silence again. But this time, I didn't rush out the door like usual. I stood behind the curtain, straining my eyes to observe, hoping to find some sign that would help me explain everything. The creaking sound moved slowly across the porch, like something was lurking, pacing back and forth in the darkness. Then I heard a scratching sound, that itchy sound, as if claws were scratching against wood. The sound rang clearly in my ears, like a vivid nightmare. My breathing became ragged and shallow. After a moment, the movement stopped, and an ominous silence filled the air. I forced myself to look out the window, my heart pounding, constantly afraid. I was sure I would see footprints on the ground, evidence of its presence. And just as I thought, when the light came on, I saw long, slender footprints, like those of some animal, lurking all over the porch. A cold feeling rose in my heart, unable to be contained. These footprints, they walked for a while, then suddenly stopped. There was no progress, no change, just a strange pause between the wooden planks, as if the creature had disappeared. A cold feeling of fear spread throughout my body. My vision blurred at the edges, and my hands shook uncontrollably. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of reality, like the world around me was crumbling, nothing was certain anymore. I wanted to scream, but I could only stand there, motionless. There is no reasonable explanation for how something could disappear into thin air like that. My mind raced, imagining terrible possibilities, inexplicable things. Does this entity obey any laws of nature? Or can it come and go freely, taunting me every night, making me live in this fear? The feeling of despair grew, and I couldn't bear it anymore. Mustering up my courage, I grabbed my camera and tiptoed out onto the porch, determined to record proof that I hadn't lost my mind. The wooden planks beneath my feet groaned again, echoing the footsteps that had tormented me for so long. My legs wobbled, and I had to use all my willpower to keep steady and walk lightly. I took a few photos of the fresh footprints and claw marks, hoping that I would have proof of this madness. In the faint circle of porch light, I saw the flower shuffle, as if the last footprints belonged to a ghostly presence that had vanished into thin air. Suddenly, the bushes rustled, louder this time, and I turned around. Standing just outside the railing, half hidden behind the foliage, was that shadow. It was taller than I thought, with elongated limbs, or perhaps a cloak, pitch black, covering its entire body. My throat was tight, I couldn't breathe. My legs screamed at me to run, but I remained still, unable to move. Something bad and dangerous was standing right in front of my eyes, and I could only watch, unable to do anything else. Moving slowly, as if gauging my reaction, the figure leaned forward, lacking any haste. Even though I couldn't see its eyes clearly, I felt their presence. It felt like a pair of invisible eyes were glued to me, watching my every little move. A wave of primal fear rushed into my mind, and my whole body broke out in a cold sweat. Even though every cell in my body wanted to run away, I couldn't take my eyes off it. Strangely enough, I felt hypnotized, even though fear had almost consumed me. In a moment of mad determination, I quickly aimed the camera, but as soon as I pressed the shutter, the figure slid deeper into the darkness, completely obscured by thick foliage. A flash of movement passed through the darkness, and then only the gently swaying tree branches remained. The night was completely silent, without a sound. My chest heaved with gasping breaths, as if my body's attempt to escape fear had never been stronger. I almost collapsed, my legs were weak and tired from the stress. Finally, I forced myself back inside, locked the door tightly and slid down, leaning my back against the door. My hands were still shaking, clutching the camera as if it was the only thing that could keep me from reality. I never took a clear picture of that thing. But the footprints and splinters of wood on my porch were still evidence, enough to remind me that what I had experienced was not just a fantasy, but a reality, or at least something close to it. I considered leaving, maybe staying at a friend's house to find safety, but a stubborn part of me didn't want to hand over this house, didn't want to let an invisible fear take over my life. However, the horror still exists, not fading with time. Even as I write these words, I can still feel an uncomfortable prickling sensation along my neck, as if invisible eyes were fixed on me, watching every move. It's been a few days since I've heard the sound of scratching, nor seen anyone behind the bushes. I tried to convince myself that maybe it would be gone forever, that I could live in peace again. But sometimes late at night, I catch myself listening to every little noise, my heart pounding in my ears, certain that I'm about to hear the slight creak of the porch boards, a haunting reminder of that presence. Occasionally, I peeked out through the curtains, only to see a fleeting figure, retreating behind the fence. Each time, I felt something strange, a profound awareness that this presence was more than just an ordinary intruder. Whatever it is, may not be bound by rational logic or natural law. Maybe it's a projection of my own fears, but sometimes I wonder if there's something worse lurking on the fringes of reality. I got to the point where I didn't know what to believe anymore. My senses began to blur, my sanity wavered, and even the ground beneath my feet became unstable. However, part of me refuses to give in completely. This house may not be the safe haven I thought it would be, but it's still my home. I refuse to let an otherworldly intruder, whether supernatural or just invisible fears, rob me of my courage. Whatever this presence is, I am preparing for its return. The confrontation is not over, and I have no intention of letting fear win. I decided that if it came back, I would face it again. Although I don't know if I have a chance, or if this confrontation will only make it stronger, I understand that living in constant terror is not living at all. I couldn't continue like this, having to wait every night, my heart pounding in my chest, my breathing shallow, as each rustle of leaves on the porch was like a strong rush of adrenaline taking over my body. I was both scared and determined. Maybe I'll find a way to banish this thing, or maybe I'll discover a truth too horrifying to comprehend. But now, I sat there, camera next to me, eyes never leaving the porch, not knowing whether I was standing on the brink of madness or on the threshold of something much more confusing and terrifying. In the silence of midnight, I could have sworn I heard the faintest of footsteps, a haunting reminder that whatever lurked out there wasn't finished with me yet. Those footsteps kept echoing in my head, as if someone was lurking, waiting for the right moment. I still remember the buzz of electricity in the air that night, and the cold wave of energy that hit my skin as soon as I entered the crowded street. The shimmering lights of multicolored paper lanterns on the sidewalk and the sound of festive music in the distance hit my temples like a wave, but my mind couldn't escape the feeling of anxiety. Even before I noticed anything strange, I felt the tension in the atmosphere. The night seemed to breathe shallowly, as if waiting for something to happen. My heart was pounding, I was a little breathless in the midst of the simple festival, and the smell of fried dough and seasoned meat did not stimulate my appetite but only increased the feeling of nausea. There was something in the air that made it impossible for me to relax. The lights flickered erratically overhead, and every shadow seemed to be expanding beyond its natural boundaries, as if they no longer belonged to this world. Amidst the bustling laughter, I felt like the back of my neck was prickly, as if someone's eyes were glued to me from afar. I tried to brush off the feeling of discomfort, convincing myself that it was just an overactive imagination, caused by fatigue and stress. But as I walked through the crowd of strangers, I caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing a few meters away, partially hidden behind the sales counter. His posture was very stiff, as if he did not belong to this crowd, like an outsider. The strange thing was that something about the tilt of his head made my stomach turn. I saw the faint metallic reflection of his hand, a camera pointed straight at me. At first I thought I was wrong. Why did he take a photo of me among all the other people at this crowded festival? But the lens was definitely pointed at me. My heart rate skyrocketed, as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. A layer of cold sweat formed on my forehead, and I couldn't stop looking at him, trying to convey that I didn't appreciate being his object. It was an indescribable feeling of being followed in the bustling crowd, as if there was a strange connection between me and that stranger. Instead of reacting like I expected, with a startled expression or backing away, he just smiled. That smile, it's hard to describe in words. His lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that seemed too straight, too bright in the flickering light, as if he were taunting me, daring me to confront him. It felt like everything I was afraid of was clearly expressed through that smile. I swallowed my saliva, my pulse quickened, I felt a lump in my throat, trying to blend into the crowd, squeezing deeper into the bustling sea of strangers around me. Yet every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was still there, always a few steps behind, camera in hand. Every time I looked back, he was only a short distance away from me. Even though the crowd was still moving, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. A moment later, I stopped near a stall displaying an array of colorful ribbons, overwhelmed with brilliant swirling patterns. But even as I was caught up in their images, I could still see him through the fluttering silk. He raised his camera again and took another photo. My whole body is tense. My hands were sweaty, the back of my neck was covered in nervous sweat. Why is he so intent on following me? The vague, inexplicable feeling keeps weighing heavily in my heart. I stepped aside, hoping to join the group of festival-goers admiring the crafts, hoping I would be able to avoid his gaze. But I glanced quickly to my right, just to confirm that he was still there. Even though the music was blaring and countless people were jostling past, I still felt completely alone in that suffocating crowd. Trying to calm down, I took out my phone and decided to take a photo of him as proof of this bizarre harassment. My heart was pounding in my ears, unable to control the rapid beat. The camera app opened, but my hands were shaking so violently I could barely focus on his appearance. When I pressed the shutter button, the result was blurry again, as if my phone was having trouble focusing on him. Each time he tried, the screen created a smudge where his face should have been. Strange, distorted images that cannot be captured clearly. My breathing became irregular, and the tightness in my chest made me wonder if I was imagining things or if something strange was actually happening. Determined not to let fear paralyze me, I decided to face him again, no longer running away. I turned around, looked straight at him, intending to confront him from afar. This time, I noticed a strange distortion in the space around his head. It reminded me of the heat shimmering on the asphalt in the summer, but this time, it was night and the distortion seemed to cling to him. His smile deepened, and looked even more unnatural, like something that wasn't human anymore. I was breathless as I realized something inexplicable, that perhaps I was seeing something that should not exist in a normal, rational world. An inexplicable presence, something incomprehensible was standing right before my eyes. A wave of nauseating confusion washed over me. I felt my pulse so strong that I was sure he could see my chest heaving in panic. The sounds around me became hazy, but I could still hear a group of people nearby, chatting about some show going on in the next block. A thought crossed my mind, and I wondered if this was my chance to escape the surveillance. Maybe I should join this group of people, pretend to be part of them, just to get out of his sight. I moved closer to them, but the crowd moved unpredictably. A swirl of confetti fell from above as the troupe of dancers passed by. The glowing pieces of paper fluttered in the night sky, creating an uneasy feeling, as if they were mocking my insecurities, as if everything around me was deliberately distracting me. In the swirl and rush of bodies, I lost sight of the man for a moment. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. The prickly feeling down my spine made me realize that he was still there. He didn't disappear, he just repositioned. Every time I tried to confront him, he would sneak into an alley or hide behind another stall. Every time I moved, that hot wave of anxiety in my stomach increased, as if he were right there, watching my every move. I became more aware of each breath, each drop of sweat running down my temples. My mouth was so dry that I could barely swallow. In that moment, I heard the faint click of the shutter on his camera. When I turned around in time, I saw him lower his camera. His eyes sparkled with joy, as if he were delighted that he had taken another photo, a new proof of my fear. Even though the music and laughter were still pulsating around me, they seemed distant, almost dissonant, like a broken soundtrack from a disturbing film. I can't bear it anymore. I decided to end this game, no matter what. Forcing my shaky legs to move, I walked straight towards him. The crowd parted for a moment, giving me a clearer view, and I picked up my pace. But with every step forward, he seemed to drift away, as if the crowd swallowed him up every time I got too close. The screams and cheers from the festival mixed with my rapid breathing, and my chest felt tight. A heavy pressure pressed on me from all sides. It seemed impossible to corner him against the dancing and neon-lit carnival. After a few minutes of frantic pursuit, I discovered him standing under a dimly lit archway near the end of the street. The air was thick with smoke from nearby grills, and the smell of burning meat made my stomach turn. I approached, my heart pounding so hard I could barely think straight. He doesn't move. He just waited, camera in hand, face partially obscured by unclear lighting. Adrenaline rushed through my veins and I stepped forward, raising my voice in question. Although I can barely remember what I said, it was something incriminating, demanding to know why he was following me, what he wanted from me. The answer whispered in the wind, as gentle as a cold wind, but powerful, as if it were pricking my skin, making everything more confusing and dangerous. He told me in that cold voice that I didn't belong here. His words cut through the chaos of the festival, sharp and intrusive. Every sound, every movement, everything seemed suddenly silent. Fear immediately took hold of me, almost physically, as if an icy hand was gripping my heart. Even though the temperature should have been hot in the crowd, his presence radiated a bitter chill, making my limbs tense, as if my body was frozen in the very air around me. In that moment, my mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which I could properly express. Why did he say that? Who is he? I stepped closer, teeth chattering despite the heat, and asked him what he meant. But as soon as I opened my mouth, a fleeting movement of the crowd blocked my view for a moment. When I looked back, that archway was empty. He's gone. There were no lingering shadows, no footsteps, just emptiness and a vague sense of a vanished presence. My chest rose and fell with each breath, my palms trembled in front of my thighs. That coldness is still there, deep under my skin, as if he had left an indelible mark. Confusion and fear spread through my body like poison, making it difficult to think logically. I scanned the sea of festival-goers frantically, hoping to catch a glimpse of his creepy smile, but all I saw were smiling faces. Bright neon lights and swirling confetti, all of these images seemed to mock my insecurities. Desperation began to gnaw at me. I tried pushing my way through the crowd of strangers, peering over my shoulder and craning my neck in every direction, but couldn't find any sign of him. Fear pounded inside my skull, each heartbeat a reminder that he could still be nearby. My surroundings seemed unusual, as if the entire festival had taken on a subtly distorted shape, making it impossible for me to escape the feeling that I was living in a distorted world, not one I was used to. The light flickered unpredictably, creating long shadows that danced on the ground, as if they had a life of their own, a separate consciousness. The music, again, sounded harsh and cruel, no longer cheerful, but like a broken soundtrack, like a disturbing film. Every time I thought I caught a faint silhouette in my peripheral vision, I was disappointed, seeing only busy crowds and completely unfamiliar faces. Every time I turned around to face that figure, I was disappointed. The strangers were startled, they seemed more interested in my crazy behavior than anything else. I told myself maybe I was just losing my mind, seeing visions born of my anxiety. Perhaps the distorted face in the photo is due to my shaking hands or poor lighting. But there was no denying that that feeling, the fear deep within me, could not be extinguished with reason alone. Yet my mind can't stop replaying the moment he whispered that I didn't belong, and the deep coldness in his voice still lingers with me. I recall the way his face seemed to shimmer more, resisting the camera's focus, as if he couldn't be clearly captured. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize everything, there was something sinister lurking behind those images and his haunting half-smile. Something, inexplicable, still haunts me, making everything vague and threatening. A strange dizziness came over me, making me feel like I was about to lose control. My breathing became rapid, and the thoughts in my head seemed to be caught up in a paranoia with no way out. I studied every face in the crowd, and was convinced that he could be hiding behind any of them. The entire festival felt drenched in menace, as if each person around me was hiding a secret, a danger. The surrounding colors were so bright, almost neon in intensity, that they stung my retinas, making it impossible to escape the feeling of confusion. I found myself tripping over a souvenir table, spilling a few knickknacks. The clerk glared at me, but I couldn't offer an apology. My heart was beating so fast, each beat was like a warning bell. I wanted to run away, but I was too scared to leave without answers. Part of me felt like I had to know who he was, why he was so clingy to me. This feeling of confusion and fear ate me up from the inside. Finally, I found refuge near an old fountain decorated with festive ribbons. The water flowed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm but did not calm my nerves. I cupped my hands in the water, splashed water on my face to try to ground myself, so I could regain consciousness. Feeling the cold liquid on my skin momentarily made my mind clearer. But as soon as I looked around, I felt like everything seemed normal for a fleeting second. Groups of friends are laughing, salespeople are greeting potential customers, and couples are dancing to distant music. My rapid pulse told me otherwise. A feeling that couldn't be shaken off, as if I was still being watched. Then in a flash, I caught a glimpse of him through the fountain. He was partially obscured by a tattered banner advertising several local tourist attractions. My entire body locked up. He slowly lifted the camera, almost solemnly, and pressed the shutter button. This time, I saw a flash of lightning, too fast to stop, as if he wanted to capture my fear in each photo. In that moment, his face wavered like a reflection in disturbed water, refusing to take solid form. It felt like his entire presence was beyond grasp, as if he didn't belong in this world. When the lightning died down, he disappeared again, disappearing into the noise of the festival, as if he had never existed, leaving only a void and confusion in my mind. My head was dizzy and a shiver ran down my spine. I found myself panting as if I had just sprinted for miles, trying to comprehend what had just happened. That was when I accepted that I might be caught up in something beyond my rational understanding. My legs were unsteady, I stumbled and leaned against the edge of the fountain. I wanted to talk to anyone to share this horrifying experience, but I doubted anyone would believe me. There is no evidence except a string of useless photos that cannot be verified, refusing to show his face clearly. My mind reeled with the memory of his words, words so cold and terrifying. "You don't belong here." The words echoed within me like a warning, or perhaps a declaration of something unspeakably bleak. Summoning all my remaining courage, I forced myself to walk toward the center of the festival once more. Every step was a monumental effort, and the possibility that I would see him again made my stomach turn. But I knew, I couldn't continue to live in this fear. I had to learn, to know. Know the truth, no matter what you face. However, a similar fear filled me at the thought of never knowing who he really was. Everywhere I looked, every passing shadow in the crowd, I felt like he was hiding somewhere. I heard the ghostly click of his camera, as if it was chasing me, endlessly. I began to doubt my own sanity, half expecting the street to warp under my feet, or the lantern lights to go out all at once. It felt like I was no longer living in reality, but caught up in something strange and inexplicable. I pushed my way through the crowd, past a swirl of confetti, neon lights flashing overhead like an ominous omen. Sweat drenched my shirt, my pulse pounded, my breathing was so shallow that my chest began to ache. The noise of the festival crept in, but it only suffocated me with its unnatural cheerfulness, as if everything around me was fake. Occasionally, I see an unusually long shadow, as if it wants to reach out to trap me inside. I can't escape the feeling that something scary is always following me. My mind reeled with the belief that I would never be able to see a festival in the same way again. Even as my terror grew and my resolve took root, I still wanted to know why he said I didn't belong here. I can't keep living in this fear forever. I peered into every corner, searching for any last trace of him, wanting to once again face a truth I couldn't explain. But the more I looked, the more I realized the night was slowly slipping away, and with it the slim chance of confronting him again. The tension in the air gradually receded, replaced by an aching emptiness. The absence of that haunting presence feels in its own way, like a torment, even more devastating. It was like an unresolved horror, an open wound that wouldn't heal, that kept tormenting me. Finally, I found myself at the edge of the festival, where the lights were dimmer and the crowd thinned. The music had faded to a distant echo, as if I had moved away from it, but it still lingered in my head. My heart was still pounding, and every nerve in my body remained on high alert, as if he could appear at any moment. But he didn't appear anymore. The last remnants of the celebration are still behind me, but I feel like I was never a part of it. The terror that had stalked me all night was now just a feeling of emptiness, as if I never belonged there. With a sense of resignation, I walked away from the noisy festivities and entered a quieter street. My legs were shaking, the air smelled foul in my mouth, as if I had just run away from an unfinished nightmare. My thoughts raced, unstoppable. Was that man a ghost, a product of my overloaded mind, or something much stranger and scarier? No matter how I turned the questions over and over in my head, I couldn't reconcile them with any normal explanation. I remember the icy grip of his hands, and the blurred face in the photos. I can still feel his cold breath near my ear when he said those words. Even when he disappeared, that cold lingered in my bones, like an indelible mark. I kept walking, trying to put distance between myself and that scary scene, but I couldn't forget him, couldn't forget what I had witnessed. Yet my relief felt hollow. My skin pricked with the lingering certainty that his gaze could still follow me, invisible but strong. Every step I took, every movement I made, that feeling stuck with me, as if he was still watching, waiting for me to return. By the time I got to the car, my breathing was somewhat steadier, but my throat was still tight and dry, as if that cold still lingered on my skin. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the door immediately, my fingers shaking as I turned on the ignition. As if I expected him to materialize next to me at any moment. At this point, I just wanted to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he might suddenly appear. As I drove away, the city lights flashed in the rearview mirror, creating a hazy silhouette of the festival still in the distance. A swirl of artificial brightness, but I knew full well that it was a part of a world I no longer belonged to. My shoulders ached from the tension, and my mind swirled around the memory of his last statement. No part of me feels victorious. All I carried was a lingering fear beneath my skin, like a hidden infection, a feeling of inescapability. I wonder if I really don't belong here. If I were somehow an intruder, an alien creature in an unwelcoming world where I could only tolerate my presence until he came to shatter the illusion of safety. Such a feeling lingers inside me, an unspeakable worry. To this day, I still glance over my shoulder every time I go out at night. The memory of his faint smile, of that face, continues to haunt my dreams, leaving me gasping for air with my heart pounding. He didn't reappear, but I felt something in the night that I couldn't quite place. An invisible fear, as if I had seen too much, or maybe too little. And whenever I feel a cold breeze on my neck, I remember his whispered warning. It echoed in my mind, like a lingering testament to that strange night, reminding me that the real horror often lies in what remains unresolved. I woke up one evening, my heart was pounding, as if some silent alarm had pulled me from sleep. I remember sitting up, feeling my shirt cling to my skin with cold sweat. Every inch of my body was tense, as if something was wrong. Even in the darkness, in my anxious wakefulness, I could feel that I was not entirely alone. A strange feeling, as if there was someone in the room, but I couldn't identify it. It was the first real sign that my old college roommate's reappearance wasn't a coincidence, but anything but normal. And looking back, that was the moment that marked the beginning of a breathtaking horror I had never imagined, one I could not avoid, facing right in my own home. I'm 27 years old, and live with my best friend, Todd, in a small suburban house on the outskirts of the city, which is always peaceful. But now, that peace has been torn apart, and I no longer know what I will face next. At least, that's what it used to be. A tree-lined path runs along the front of the house, with just enough yard space for a grill and a few lawn chairs, and large windows to let in sunlight when the curtains are open. Anyway, after all that's happened, I'm not sure I can enjoy sunlight the same way anymore. Every ray of light now only makes me feel uneasy, as if what I've been through has changed the way I perceive everything around me. I remember the day I received that unexpected text from Drew, my roommate from college. He's someone I've never particularly liked. We were assigned to share a dorm room during my freshman year. I'm not really close to him, but I take him for granted. And as soon as the semester ended, we went our separate ways. Nearly half a decade has passed and I haven't heard anything about him. Then suddenly, he reached out, announced that he lived nearby and insisted on coming to visit, to reminisce with me about the good old days. I tried to put it out of my mind as nerves or discomfort left over from our past. But deep down, I felt that reconnecting with him would lead to trouble. I let Todd know about Drew's arrival. Todd was nonchalant, he just told me to do what I needed to do, but teased me about how sharp I had become. He also commented that I looked like I was having trouble sleeping, and that maybe seeing an old friend would make me feel better. But I don't feel that as a sincere friendship. I feel like Todd is hooked on something in my life, and I can't understand it. When Drew first appeared in the doorway, I found myself sweating uncontrollably. My palms were wet and my mouth was dry. I could see him through the small window in the door. He looked almost like he had been in college, slim, slightly hunchbacked, a typical character you wouldn't give a second glance to on a busy street. But there was something about him that made me feel different. The air around him seemed charged with static, and as cliché as it may sound, I couldn't ignore the cold that suddenly swept into the hallway as soon as I opened the door. It felt like a freezer had been opened in the middle of summer, spreading a strange coldness. I tried to breathe evenly, trying to keep my voice steady as I greeted him. But as soon as he walked in, my living room light flashed once and then cut out. I gave some excuses, talking about old wiring, but a strange fear rippled through me. I clearly remember the immediate tension in my shoulders, my pulse ringing in my ears, drowned out by the rustling of the trees outside. Or at least, Todd tried to have a conversation. Drew mostly responded with awkward nods or monochromatic responses. I tried to keep the conversation going, but my throat felt like sandpaper, and my heart couldn't slow down. After he left, which luckily didn't take too long, I walked around the house, trying to figure out why I was so stressed. That's when I pulled out an old college photo album. I wanted to see if I was overreacting or simply dredging up old grudges. But then, I saw it. Blurred black. In almost every photo in which Drew appears, there are dark stains surrounding him. They look like ink spills or mold climbing from the edges of the photo, as if they don't belong in the photo, or even this world. But these photos are digital prints, and I have stored them carefully. There is no reason why they should be damaged like that. I remember flipping through them many times in the past, and the images were absolutely fine. But now, it was as if an ominous shadow had flowed across the paper, wherever he stood. A strange feeling arose in my heart as I looked at those blurred black marks. They were like inexplicable traces, as if something else was affecting these photos. I showed Todd a few pictures the next day, saying there was some strange discoloration. He wondered if something in the printing process had reacted with the chemicals. However, I couldn't escape the feeling that those dark stains made my stomach churn, like they were reflecting something evil. Over the next week, Drew found reasons to stop more often. He said he lived nearby, but that seemed strange since the neighborhood is small, and I'm usually aware of new residents. Every time he arrived, a door somewhere in the house would automatically slam shut. Sometimes it's the front door, sometimes it's a closet, or sometimes it's the door to the basement. The first few times, Todd and I blamed it on the wind or a draft, but those doors weren't facing open windows or vents. That is inexplicable. At the same time, the lights in my bedroom started flickering and burning out more frequently. The light bulb I had replaced would die with a soft pop, leaving me in darkness, thumping against the still air, as if something wrong was happening. My nights became restless. I continued to dream about Drew's face, looming in the corner of my vision. In the dream, a thick shadow always stretched behind him, twitching like a living creature. These nightmares constantly haunt me, making me wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing so hard, and I think I might go dark for a moment. Every morning, I think of ways to keep him out of the house if he stops, but I can't avoid the feeling of tension that always hangs in the air. Every evening, I found myself opening the door, feeling the terrible coldness creep up my spine as I tried to smile and act calm. Drew never really talked much, but he was always there, lurking like a shadow in my life. I started feeling unsettled all the time, even when he wasn't there. The house carried a different mood, like the walls themselves were watching me, absorbing my fears. I often shiver involuntarily, my skin crawling with goosebumps, as if an invisible presence hovers around me. Then I started noticing him in places where he shouldn't be. For example, I caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror when I was alone in the house. The moment I turned around, I realized that there was no one there, just an empty hallway. Another time, I was warming food in the microwave, staring at the reflective surface on the door. I could see the shape of someone behind me, but when I turned around, the kitchen was empty. An indescribable feeling overwhelmed me, as if someone was always near me, but when I turned around, there was nothing but empty space. My body was locked in fear, and I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the cloth to the floor. One day, after Drew left, I saw Todd in the living room, looking pale and nervous. He told me that although he didn't see anything exactly strange, every time Drew was around, an oppressive heaviness seemed to settle on the house. I felt it, that vague and inexplicable feeling that hung in the air. Todd was even distracted at work because he found himself scared as soon as he could hear a knock on the door. He said maybe it was time to talk to Drew and ask him to respect our space. Although Todd felt uneasy about the idea of confronting him directly, I knew that Drew's presence had made it impossible for both of us to continue living normally. I tried to talk to Drew indirectly via text, wanting to understand more about why he kept visiting. He responded with terse messages, with no real explanation. Then he would appear again the next day, with that same cold aura, never volunteering to explain the reason for his presence. The rational part of me screamed that this behavior was wrong, that I had to come clean to him about this inconvenience. My instincts told me to cut him off completely, but there was a vague feeling, as if Drew knew something I didn't, as if he was feeding on my fears, deliberately keeping me in this state of anxiety. I can't quite explain why I let it continue. It was as if I was paralyzed by the situation, unable to form a decisive plan, a concrete step. On an impulse, I rummaged through old yearbooks and digital photo folders, looking for more pictures of Drew, wanting to find any clue that would explain this strangeness. Almost every photo that Drew appears in has strange dark spots around him. These stains cling to his figure like an oily aura, and in some photographs they stretch across the page, like elongated fingers or monstrous veins. My heart was pounding so hard that I had to sit down, pressing my palms against my knees to stop them from shaking. I wondered if there might be some natural explanation for these stains, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of claustrophobia twisting in my gut. I began to doubt my own sanity. I found myself checking the locks on the windows, hoping to see Drew outside, just standing there, his eyes locked on me through the glass. I jumped at every little noise, like a tree branch scratching the house, or a wind blowing through the fence. Every once in a while, I wake up and swear I see a figure in the corner of the bedroom appear near the closet door. But whenever I summoned the courage to turn on the light, I found nothing but an empty room. Todd tried to reassure me, although he admitted that he was also disturbed. He couldn't understand what was going on, but I knew, we all felt something strange in this house. It seemed like there was an invisible presence following us, making everything more uncomfortable and scary than ever. He suggested we move, or at least temporarily stay in a hotel. But I hesitated, feeling too paranoid to leave the house uninhabited. Something in me believed that if I left, Drew would follow. That cold, invisible presence would appear wherever I went, making it impossible for me to escape. I became convinced that the darkness that clung to him was not only attached to him, but had permeated my world, as if I had accidentally allowed it in. Then, that night, I found him outside my bedroom window. It was almost midnight and I was staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with anxious thoughts, unable to find peace. I got up to get water from the kitchen, and as I passed the window in the hallway, I saw a tall shape in the porch light. My chest tightened. The shape just stood there, motionless, staring at me. Even through the darkness, I recognized Drew's posture, his distinct silhouette. I froze, gripping the windowsill so tightly that my nails dug into the wood. The edges of my vision were getting darker and darker, and I had to remind myself to stay calm. When I blinked, he was gone. There was no movement, no sound, as if he had evaporated into the night air. A creepy feeling overwhelmed me, and I stood there, not daring to believe what I had just seen. The next morning, I pulled Todd into the room and explained everything in a low, urgent voice. He listened, his face tense. He doesn't deny it. In fact, he revealed that he saw footprints in the backyard. The footprint doesn't match either of ours. They led from the fence straight to the side of the house, then disappeared. Todd suggests calling someone, possibly the police or even a private security company. But we both knew what we were going to say. Our old friend keeps showing up, and he leaves behind stains, strange black images, and kills our light bulbs. It sounds unbelievable. I was starting to feel carefree. That same day, Todd left for work while I stayed home. I used some of my vacation days because I couldn't concentrate at the office. The house was quiet, painfully so, and the silence made my skin crawl. I locked all the doors and closed the curtains, leaving only a single lamp in the living room. The feeling of fear still persists, making me unable to feel secure even though I have tried to create a safe space in my own home. Every creak of floorboards makes my pulse spike. It was mid-afternoon when I heard faint footsteps in the hallway. My lungs were seized by fear. I grabbed the light cord, ready to pull it out of the socket if the overhead light flickered. Sure enough, as soon as I stood up, the bulb in the lamp popped out and went out. Darkness filled the living room, except for the faint light coming through the louvered windows. I stood there, not daring to move, and only the sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet space. I stood in almost complete darkness, breathing raggedly, fighting a strong urge to run. My entire body trembled, and my mouth was so dry that I could barely swallow. I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm, trying to tell myself that it was just my imagination. But then, I heard the faint squeak of the door hinge. Basement door. My stomach turned, and fear hit me like a wave. The door is old, rarely used, but it has a distinct squeak. I forced myself to move towards it, my heart beating so hard that I felt pain in my chest. As I reached the top of the basement stairs, the smell of damp concrete and stale air reached me. The door was partially hanging, although I was sure I had locked it beforehand. A feeling of anxiety rose within me, but I couldn't give up. I turned on the basement light, and for once, the bulb didn't blow. A weak yellow light illuminated the stairs. I slowly walked down. My legs felt like jelly, heavy and difficult to move. My entire body was so tense that every step made me wince. The basement was empty, cluttered with only boxes and old furniture. But the air feels heavier than ever, like a storm cloud has settled inside, holding me back. I stood in the middle of the room, listening tensely. My breathing sounded deafening in my ears. Then, without warning, the light above me flickered a few times, casting strange shadows onto the concrete walls. My shadow lengthened unnaturally, and for a second, it looked like another figure was standing behind me. My blood ran cold. I turned around but didn't see anything. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had touched my shoulder. My skin tingled where I felt the slightest contact, and an indescribable feeling spread throughout my body. I ran upstairs, slammed the basement door behind me and locked it twice. My heart was pounding, it felt like it was almost bursting in my chest. I stood there by the door, panting, trying to convince myself that I was in control of the situation. But the fear is too great. It's not just a constant fear. It was a primal certainty that something unnatural was closing in around me. I could actually taste the darkness at the back of my throat, as if it was flowing into my body. That evening, Todd came home. The sun had set, and the house was plunged into long darkness. I told him I couldn't stay here anymore. My voice trembled and my hands were still shaking from the shock in the basement. He agreed, saying we should go to his parents' house across town. We hastily packed a few essential items, our hearts pounding at every little noise. I caught myself constantly glancing at the window, hoping to see Drew's face there, watching us, but there was nothing. Just before we left, there was a light knock at the front door. We both stiffened, and a feeling of terror filled my body. My skin was covered in goosebumps so intense it felt almost painful. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and an absolute panic shot through me. I placed my hand on the doorknob, feeling the icy coldness of the metal. Todd begged me not to open the door, but I felt forced. My heart was pounding like a drum, making it difficult to hear anything else. My breathing came in shallow rushes, as I turned the door knob slowly, fear clinging to each movement. Standing on the porch, he wore the same blank expression, as if time and space had both stopped. The streetlights cast strange shadows around him, making his slim frame look long and skewed. The air turned cold, as if a cold front had just swept across the yard. I felt my teeth calling, fear filling me. A sudden chill filled my bones, making me cringe. In the faint light of the porch light, I noticed a faint wisp of black smoke around his shoulders, like curly smoke or an indistinct silhouette. It's not my imagination. This is real. As real as the fear burning in my veins. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me. I backed away, almost tripping over my feet. Todd, standing behind me, inhaled sharply. I felt that something else was on the porch, as if an invisible presence rolled in the darkness. A wave of nausea washed over me, and my vision blurred for a second. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I forced my voice to remain steady as I told him we were leaving and he needed to go. He tilted his head as if considering the statement, then stepped forward. My heart thundered in protest and every hair on my body was filled with fear, but then something in my mind snapped, a desperate need to resist whatever force he brought. I raised my hand, palm out, and repeated that he needed to go. The atmosphere changed. The cold person lingered, but Drew seemed hesitant. The shadows around him flickered, almost as if they were alive and responding to my resistance. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline steady my shaking legs. With trembling words, I told him I wanted no more visits, no more unannounced drops. My breathing was shallow, but my voice was determined. He stared a moment longer, then stepped back. An expression that could have been one of annoyance, or perhaps it was disappointment, overcame his features. He turned and walked into the night, disappearing beyond the glow of the street lights. The oppressive cold subsided, but it did not disappear. The porch still feels colder than the rest of the world. Todd and I locked the door, grabbed our things, and jumped into his car. My heart didn't stop racing until we were miles apart. We spent the next few nights at Todd's parents' place. I didn't sleep well at all, constantly haunted by thoughts of drawing outside, blurry images, and a cold feeling that couldn't be dispelled. When we finally mustered the courage to return to our home, I expected the worst. Maybe burn out a lot of light bulbs or open a door, or maybe everything is just as disturbed as before. Instead, I found everything locked exactly how we left it. The darkness didn't feel quite as scary, but I couldn't ignore a lingering heaviness in the air. It was as if something had seeped into the walls and corners, some residue of that presence, still there, in every breath I took. I still catch myself looking over my shoulder in the hallways, especially around dusk. The lamp does not burn out often, but sometimes I hear the creak door when there is no draft. And sometimes, during the quieter hours of the night, I think I see a shape in the window, a flicker of movement, a silhouette that fades as soon as I focus on it. Each time, an unspeakable feeling overwhelmed me, as if something I couldn't identify was still lurking in the darkness. I can't say for sure if Drew really disappeared or if he was just waiting, but I know that something about him has changed. Something that cannot be explained by mere coincidence or old grudges. Todd wanted us to move last, and I agreed that was probably for the best. However, I was not convinced that leaving the house would free me from the horror that Drew had brought back into my life. Part of me wondered if this uneasy feeling would follow me wherever I went, an invisible mark left behind by a man I never really understood, and by something that might have clung to him. I couldn't help but feel a paralyzing, drawn-out fear every time he appeared in my reflections when I was alone. Some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed. And now, as I stand here staring into my own mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, I swear I catch the faintest glimpse of Drew behind me, just for a moment. The coldness returned, crawling up my spine, and a single thought placed itself in my mind. Maybe he was never just a simple man, and maybe I invited something much worse into my home than an unwelcome roommate. The moment I first set foot in that basement apartment, something was wrong. The air was so quiet, it was as if everything in this house had frozen. I remember standing in the doorway, feeling as if I had entered a space that did not belong to me, like I was intruding on something old and wary. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was all just excessive anxiety from what had happened. The price was reasonable, and the host assured me that the space had been recently renovated. It's just an old house with a bit of character, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. In hindsight, I realized that I should have paid more attention to the subtle warnings, the signs that I overlooked. The coldness in the pit of my stomach might have saved me from nights of endless fear, and final moments of indescribable terror. The walls are painted light gray and seem to soak up the dim light rather than reflect it. My living area is essentially one large room divided by a bookshelf and a half wall separating the kitchen, creating a space that's just large enough, but with a cramped feel, as if it's withholding things that can't be said. A narrow hallway leads to the bathroom and a small storage closet. It's a strange layout, perhaps the result of a hasty renovation by the previous owner. Almost immediately, little things started making me feel uncomfortable. The first night, as I was unpacking boxes and stacking books, I heard a gentle shuffling outside the door, a faint fabric on the wall. I froze in place, heart pounding, and listened for a minute, but the sound stopped as soon as I held my breath to concentrate. I told myself that it was nothing more than my imagination combined with the groans of an old building settling in at night. However, that feeling still stuck with me, making it impossible for me to erase it from my mind. A few days later, I caught a whine of something old and moldy, like wet earth mixed with dusty fabric drifting through the hallway. I assume the smell is seeping from a hidden corner of the house. After all, old buildings often have that musty smell. Yet I found myself constantly checking the corners of my basement apartment, sure I would find evidence of mold or water damage, but there was none. The walls are dry, the floors are solid. However, sometimes, especially late at night, I could swear the smell would increase, as if something was getting closer. That feeling made me uneasy, as if there was a presence silently approaching me from the darkness. I tried going about my routine, preparing simple meals, cleaning, and keeping my mind occupied. But every so often, I would feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The unmistakable feeling of being watched by someone I couldn't see. My muscles will tense, and my heart will speed up. Then I'll force myself to exhale, look around, and realize that I'm at least completely intuitive on my own. That feeling of discomfort, however, never goes away completely. If anything, it built over time, like a slow fear in the back of my mind, growing deeper and deeper, harder and harder to dispel. The homeowner occasionally walked through the house during the day, checking the heating system or making sure the old pipes weren't leaking, but each time it only made me feel more uneasy, as if something wasn't right, still silently lurking in this space. One afternoon, he casually mentioned that the house had long belonged to a collector's family. He talked about it briefly, as if it were just a bit of trivia. The former residents have traveled widely, amassing bizarre artifacts that seem to clutter every corner of the property. He said he had heard rumors that some pieces were hidden in the walls or under the floor. The idea of stumbling across the ruins gave me chills, though I tried to shrug it off like an overactive imagination, convincing myself it was just baseless word-of-mouth stories. But then, the footsteps started. Night after night, the footsteps became more and more distinct. They began as a pair of measured steps in the hallway adjacent to my apartment. It was just the sound of slow, rhythmic footsteps heading towards my door, then stopping and finally fading away. Sometimes I'll open the door, thinking perhaps a neighbor has wandered in by mistake, but I never find anyone. My heart skipped a beat. The bulbs, relatively new, buzzed faintly and then returned to full brightness. In that brief stuttering moment, I could have sworn I saw a silhouette in the kitchen doorway, tall and unnatural. A cold air closed around me, and I broke a shudder. When the lights returned to normal, there was no one there. However, I'm sure I didn't imagine it. My palms sweat, and my heartbeat echoes in my ears. I spent the rest of the night on the edge, jumping at the slightest sound, feeling there was always something lurking nearby, just out of my sight. By the second week, the footsteps came almost every night. I started losing sleep. My breathing became shallow whenever darkness fell, as if my body was instinctively preparing for whatever might be lurking through the hallway. To make matters worse, the hallway's overhead lights had begun to flicker more frequently. And sometimes, in those flickers, I catch glimpses of movement, a flash of what appears to be a heel turning a corner, or the tail of a coat disappearing around the bend. Each time, I would feel an icy fear run through my chest, as if I were being forced into an unavoidable situation. Anxiety began to overwhelm every other thought, and I couldn't convince myself that it was all just my imagination. One night, it escalated in a way that felt like a tipping point. I was lying in bed, trying my best to drift off despite the discomfort in my stomach, when I heard footsteps again. This time slower, clearer. They stopped right outside my door, making me feel like a cold wave was rushing through my body. My throat was dry and I could barely swallow. My heart was beating loudly enough for me to hear my own beat. Summoning courage from the deepest recesses of my mind, I jumped out of bed and opened the door. The overhead lighting in the hallway was weak, leaving only a dull yellow glow. And standing there, right in the middle of the hallway, was a man I had never seen before. His face was pale and thin, like a faded portrait in an ancient photograph. The strangest thing was his translucence. I could clearly see the outline of his form, but the details seemed washed out, as if all the color had been drained from him. my body constricted with panic. My breath came in ragged bursts, and cold sweat broke out along my forehead. As I stood there in utter terror, the man began reaching towards me. Every hair on my arms and neck stood up in alarm. The temperature around me dropped sharply. I could see my breath forming a mist in front of me. Instantly, my teeth chattered, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. But my legs refused to move. I stood there, paralyzed, as his hand inched closer, as if he was reaching out for me or trying to grasp something just beyond my chest. My heart thunders against my rib cage. The moment I blinked, he disappeared. It was as if he had never been there, except for the cold that lingered, seeping into my bones. I stumbled backwards, closing the door with a shaking hand. My mind swirled with questions. Did I really see that, or was this just a trick of my tired, anxious brain? Still, the chill in the air felt very real, and there was nothing imaginary about my ragged breathing and pounding heartbeat. The next morning, I confronted my landlord in the upstairs kitchen, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. I was careful to speak indirectly, not wanting to sound like I was accusing him of anything, or worse, that I had lost my mind. He didn't seem surprised. He mentioned that strange things have been rumored to happen in the house for decades. He shrugged and suggested that perhaps some presence was still attached to the building. I felt a wave of nausea in my gut. Part fear, part anger. How could he rent me the basement without warning me about this? From that point on, my focus became survival until my lease ended. Every day, I keep myself out of the apartment as much as possible, staying late for work or taking walks around the neighborhood. But inevitably, I had to return. And each night brings new horrors. There was never anything as dramatic as the full appearance in the hallway, but small events constantly shook my sanity. One night I walked into my living area and found a strange, dusty handprint on the side of the sofa, the shape contorted as if by a hand making it not quite human. Another time, I woke up in the early hours of the morning and noticed that the overhead light in the hallway was flickering. I made sure I turned it off before going to bed. My physical reactions became more difficult to control. My hands shook uncontrollably every time I approached the door. My breathing became shallow and sweat dripped from my upper lip. 1 hour 5 minutes and 29 seconds. I started seeing shadows moving along the wall out of the corner of my eye. Then, in a quiet moment, I turned around and there was nothing there. My mind is always on high alert. My ears heard every creak, every change in temperature, every faint breath from the cracks around the window. At times, the terror felt almost suffocating, like a heavy blanket pressed against my chest. I lost weight because I had almost no appetite. Sleeping pills became a necessity just so I could rest for a few hours, even though they did little to stop the nightmares that haunted me. In those dreams, the man in the vintage suit would stand at the edge of my vision, always reaching out, always trying to get me to come closer. My sense of reality began to distort. More than once I wondered if I was losing my sanity. Could it all be explained by stress, isolation, or maybe even an undetected gas leak, causing hallucinations? I called a professional to test for carbon monoxide or mold, anything tangible to explain this phenomenon. Tests came back normal. No leaks, no toxins, no reasonable explanations. I was left alone with my insecurity. Finally, when I reached the last week of my contract, I was devastated. My eyes looked blank and my nerves were shot. However, I also felt a strange burst of energy every day knowing I was so close to escape. I packed my things as soon as I could, stacking the boxes in the corner of the living room. I tried my best to ignore the feeling that someone was watching my every move. Whenever a cold feeling crawls down the back of my neck, I force myself to continue packing my things, refusing to look over my shoulder. On my last night in that apartment, I half expected an all-out attack from whatever was lurking in those hallways. But instead there was an eerie, almost pent-up silence. I remember lying on the mattress. My bed frame was disassembled, looking up at the ceiling. I was so scared that I couldn't sleep. The silence was ominous, like the calm before the storm. Hours passed, my eyelids grew heavy. Then, in the silence, I heard it. A single step in the hallway, so close it could have been right behind the door. My heart beat rapidly. I held my breath. The doorknob never turned and no footsteps followed. It was just an intentional sound. When dawn finally crept through the small windows near the basement ceiling, I jumped out of bed with determination fueled by fear. The homeowner stopped by to ask when I would hand over the keys. I indirectly told him that I would leave as soon as my truck was packed. He nodded half-heartedly at me, as if he knew why, but didn't dare say it. I felt one last shiver as I locked the door for the last time. The feeling of being watched increased until I climbed the stairs and closed the basement door behind me. I wish I could say it was over. That when I left the place, I never felt that presence again. But the truth is even more worrying. Even in my new place, a modern building with bright lighting and no quaint corners, there are still times at night when the air becomes suddenly cold. I would hear a gentle creaking sound, like floorboards under slow, careful steps. Then I looked around, my heart pounding, and saw only the furniture, the walls, my own reflection in the window. However, the memory of that pale face still lingered. Sometimes I catch myself hoping to see a ghost somewhere in the corner. My pulse spiked and my throat went dry, reminding me of those nights in the basement again. In the end, there were no dramatic confrontations, no injuries, or headlines. The real horror lay in the slowly gnawing fear that haunted me throughout those weeks and never let go. I escaped from the basement when my contract ended, but I carry that experience like a ghost in my head. There is a lesson buried somewhere in that ordeal. Perhaps some places still retain the energies of the past, refusing to let them fade away. Or maybe it's a warning that certain artifacts, certain histories, leave marks that no amount of new paint or renovation can cover. Even now, just recounting the event sends chills down my spine and my body tenses as I remember that ghostly hand's touch. The memories are so vivid that sometimes I wonder how I convinced myself to stay so long. I suppose I clung to my rational mind, believing that I could get through if I just tried a little harder. But that rational part took a severe beating in that house. It's over. I remind myself of that truth whenever old terrors resurface. I was no longer in that cold, dark hallway, facing a figure who shouldn't have existed. I left musty smells, flickering lights, and eerie silence behind. Yet the imprint remains, buried in my senses, emerging in the darkest hours. I think that's a real obsession. Not the figure in the suit but the nagging fear that reality was less stable than I had believed. That at any moment, a door could open in the middle of the night and reveal something I cannot fully explain. Reaching out to the terrible bone-chilling cold. Even though I was outside, I couldn't escape the realization that these things, these presences, might still be there, lurking in places beyond plain sight. And the scariest part is that we can easily stumble upon them, lured by the cheap rent in an old house or the promise of a quaint living space. After all, I can only say this. If you ever feel a cold hand on your shoulder when you're alone in a dark hallway, think twice before turning around. Some things, once seen, can never be truly unsighted. I remember the exact moment the atmosphere in that old inn changed. A second later, the hallway outside my room was still and silent. Next, a cold wind suddenly blew, bringing with it the faint sound of something heavy rubbing against wood. My heart staggered at that sound, every hair on my arm stood up. That's how it always seems to start. A subtle disturbance in the silence, a chill that seemed to rise from the floorboards and an overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong. I just arrived at this inn a few days ago, looking for a quiet place to stay while I looked at a property a few miles away. The building was old, a two-story structure with a slanted roof, light gray walls that might once have been white, and a chipped stone walkway leading to an ornate wooden door. The owner explained in a dry voice that the inn was over a century old, renovated here and there. As I crossed the threshold, I noticed the stench of old carpets and dusty curtains, tinged with some kind of medicinal smell, as if this place had been used for more than just a place to live. My room was on the second floor, at the end of a narrow hallway that curved around the main staircase. Lighting is sparse and far apart, often flickering or simply too dim. Finding the right key at night is always a challenge when the only light comes from a single yellow bulb in the ceiling. What caught my attention that first evening was how cold the hallway was, especially near the far bathroom. Even when I asked the manager if the heater was on, he just shrugged and said the building's insulation was not good but insisted the rooms themselves were warm enough. I tried not to think about it, but each night I found myself increasingly sensitive to that drop in temperature, as if the hallway itself were breathing its icy breath against the back of my neck. On the second night, I was awakened around 2 a.m. by a loud noise. My heart immediately pounded against my chest and my palms began to sweat. For a moment, I wondered if there had been an accident on the stairs or if someone had fallen through the door. As I stood up and gingerly opened the door, I heard another explosion from the end of the hallway. It sounded like the bathroom door being slammed shut. I tried to rationalize. It could just be the wind or a draft from an open window. My breath hitched as I walked barefoot into the hallway onto the cold wooden floor. I approached the bathroom door and found it tightly closed. The hallway was eerily quiet again. The silence was somehow even more unsettling than the pounding on the door. The next morning, after a restless night, I told the owner about the noise. He glanced at me contemptuously, muttered something about old frames expanding and contracting in the cold, then changed the subject. His casual attitude did not reassure me at all, but I tried to convince myself that he was right. Old buildings make strange noises. I tried to focus on my day job, but I kept recalling the distinct power behind that slammed door. It is not as gentle as a draft. It was as if someone or something had put all their strength into closing it. Another day passed without incident, although the atmosphere around the bathroom corridor remained uncomfortably cold. That night, the door started banging again. This time I forced myself to lie in bed and not investigate anymore. My heart pounded in my chest and sweat trickled down my temples, even as the rest of me felt chilled to the bone. The floor creaked outside my room as if someone was shuffling past, and I held my breath, praying the footsteps would continue down the stairs or toward the main entrance. Instead, they stopped right in front of my house. I suddenly felt panic as I waited, motionless, for what might happen next. Uneventful. There was no knock on the door, no next step, just an oppressive silence that weighed on me until I was finally able to fall into a fitful sleep. By the time the third night had passed, I was exhausted and exhausted. I told myself I would investigate thoroughly because living in a state of constant unrest was driving me crazy. My logic is very simple. If I could prove to myself that it was just a strong wind or a warped piece of wood, maybe I would sleep better. It was almost 1 a.m. when I heard the first loud noise through the walls. I swallowed the lump in my throat, adrenaline already running through my veins. My hands were shaking and my mouth was dry as I left the room. The hallway was dimly lit by a single overhead light. The carpet's musty smell seemed stronger than usual, and my heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid just standing there would wake any of the other guests. The bathroom door was closed when I approached. My breathing was shallow, my chest tightening with every step. A feeling of fear clung to me as if something invisible wanted to push me back into the room. But I kept moving forward. I reached out and touched the doorknob. It's freezing cold. My fingers almost jerked away from the shock of the cold metal, but I held on. Then a sudden slam came from the other side and the door vibrated so violently that I felt its vibrations travel up my arm. My breath caught in my throat and I pulled my hand away, my heart beating so fast I thought it might burst. The door stabilized for a moment, but I felt a heavy presence there as if there was something looming right behind the wooden door. In a moment of desperate determination, I grabbed the door handle again, this time determined to hold on tight. If it was the wind, I reasoned, I should be able to feel the pressure change. But the moment I tightened my grip, a huge force almost ripped the doorknob out of my hand. The suddenness left me gasping for air, my whole body tensing as I struggled to hold on. A terrifying growl, or perhaps a low hiss, came from inside, and I could feel the vibrations of that strange sound through my fingers. My blood was as cold as ice, my legs were shaking so violently that I had to lean against the wall with my free hand. Panic filled my mind, urging me to let go, urging me to run back to my room, lock the door, and never leave again. But a bit of desperate curiosity held me back. Then the pressure increased and the doorknob twisted violently in my hand. I lost control of my hand, my fingers slipping as if the metal had become slick. I reflexively let go of my hand, staggered back and cried out in surprise. As soon as my hand left the doorknob, the door slammed shut so hard I thought the entire frame would shatter into pieces. The sound echoed throughout the hallway, leaving a painful buzzing feeling in my ears. My chest heaved as I regained my balance, cold sweat running down my spine. Now there can be no more confusion. There's something in there. Something much more powerful than a mere draft. I ran back to my room without hesitation, locked the door and pressed my ear to the wood. My lungs burned with each rapid breath. Silence followed, almost mocking in its stillness. That night I could hardly sleep, my mind racing with unbelievable explanations. Am I hallucinating? My senses became more acute from exhaustion and paranoia. Or is there actually a presence occupying that bathroom? The idea of a supernatural entity seemed absurd, but the sheer power I felt in that knob was undeniable. At certain moments, my rational mind confirmed that I must have been half awake and evoked that growl. However, my shaking limbs and the vivid memory of that violent impact tell a different story. The next morning, I decided to check out the bathroom. Maybe I'll discover some mechanical trick or find evidence of rotting wood getting caught in the draft. My heart ached as I approached, but the daylight streaming through the hallway windows gave me some courage. As I approached the door, I noticed deep grooves in the wood, long scratches that looked disturbingly like claw marks. I knelt down to take a closer look and sure enough I saw 5 elongated grooves etched into the surface, as if created by impossibly long fingers. The sight almost made me sick. My heart was pounding, I felt lightheaded. This isn't just the product of an old door warping in the cold. Something had left signs of violence right on the wood. I walked out of the bathroom and down the stairs, my mind filled with disbelief and horror. I tried to hint to the manager that the hallway was much colder than anywhere else, strange noises kept me awake, and there were some alarming scratches on the bathroom door. He just made a casual comment about how the marks were always there, that customers occasionally complained about them, and that he only occasionally repainted the wood so they wouldn't look so unsightly. The conversation left me feeling deeply helpless. It was as if this place had some sort of tacit agreement with the residents and everyone else just shrugged it off. That day, I avoided my room as much as possible. I lingered in the main lobby, which was a little warmer and filled with antiques that rattled every time someone walked across the rickety floor. I glanced at the wide windows, noticing the sunlight streaming into the space, revealing floating dust particles and worn patterns on the threadbare carpet. I kept thinking back to last night's events, my heart pounding every time I remembered that strange growl. I felt trapped in a waking nightmare, not knowing whether to pack up my things and leave immediately or force myself to endure one last night to see if I could gather more information. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the western hills, I caught a glimpse of the hallway from the foot of the stairs. The hallway looked darker than ever, the single light bulb flickering as if it was struggling to stay lit. My mouth was dry, a feeling of dread curled in my gut. I wanted to run away, but a stubborn curiosity pulled me back down those creaky stairs. My head was buzzing with questions. What if the cause is logical? What if I let superstition and fear turn a normal situation into a grotesque delusion? Despite my racing thoughts, my body trembled as I stood in front of my house. I could see the bathroom door at the end of the hallway, part of it was ajar, and the lights weren't on inside. My chest tightened and my palms felt cold as I put the key in the lock. Once inside, I turned on the overhead light and tried to calm myself. Every muscle in my body remained tense, as if waiting for the door to slam at any moment. Minutes passed and nothing happened. Finally, feeling too agitated to sleep but too tired to think clearly, I sat down on the edge of the bed. The bedding felt oppressively warm, contrasting with the cold air around the corners of the room. I noticed the same smell of medicine hovering near the door, stronger than before, making me dizzy. My breathing became shallow and my heart pounded in my chest. However, the exhaustion passed in a moment, and I must have dozed off because I was awakened by a light scratching noise. It was coming from the hallway somewhere near that bathroom. My heart was pounding as I stood up. The scratching sound was long, slow and deliberate, like fingernails scratching wood. A wave of nausea spread throughout my body. I opened the door an inch, looking into the hallway. It was difficult to see anything in the low light, but the sound was definitely coming from near the bathroom. The hallway was freezing, the cold hitting me like a physical force. I strained my eyes, trying to catch a glimpse of any movement, but the hallway was empty, except for the bathroom door, which was ajar. I felt compelled to step forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. My mind screamed at me to stop, to get out of that inn and never come back. But my legs carried me forward. Each step seemed louder than the thunder in the silence, and with each rattle of the floorboards, my heart jumped into my throat. When I reached the bathroom, I hesitated just inches from the doorway, that oppressive cold increasing until my breathing became shaky gasps. I stared at the door. Those claw-like scratches were now even deeper, and the doorknob was turned slightly again, as if someone's hand had been placed on the other side. My hand trembled when I reached for it. I couldn't help but imagine something inside suddenly yanking the door open and pulling me inside. After leaving the inn, I couldn't stop looking around, feeling like every shadow in the city could hide something watching me. There is always a feeling of something cold surrounding me, even though I drive through crowded streets. The silence in the car made me tense, the street lights flickering on the windshield like invisible ghosts calling to me. I arrived home, but as soon as I opened the door and walked in, my anxiety spiked again. The feeling I can't shake, like there's something in this house that doesn't belong to me. Even though nothing happened, I still felt an eerie stillness, as if I hadn't left that place. I leave behind the events of last night, but the memory of the bathroom door, the cold seeping into my bones, remains. The next day, when it was morning, I couldn't sleep. Instead of resting, I walked around the house, checking every room, every door, just to make sure there was nothing lurking in the dark. I checked every lock, every door, even though I knew they were still intact as before. But deep inside, I know one thing: they are not safe. Something has crossed the line. And then, that night, as I was getting ready to go to bed, a cold wind suddenly blew through the window, causing the curtain to flip back and forth as if someone was looking in. I shivered and closed the window. But the silence returned, heavier than ever. And then I heard footsteps, this time not in the hallway, but right in the living room, near where I had just checked. It was as if someone was standing right behind me. My legs are numb. I turned around, and a bone-chilling feeling ran through my body. I don't see anyone. But I'm sure I heard that. The noise is intentional. A familiar sound of walking, slowly, as if waiting for an opportunity. I couldn't say a word, I just stood still, feeling my breathing become heavy. Then suddenly, a knock on the door rang out, very gentle, but enough to startle me. The main door. No one can come at this hour. I walked to the door, my heart pounding so hard that my ears were ringing. But when I opened the door, there was no one. Just a quiet space, a gentle breeze blowing and long shadows on the wall. I started to wonder if I was just freaking myself out, or if I was really experiencing something inexplicable. But I can't lie to myself forever. I felt watched, not by a person, but by some hidden, and now, waiting entity. I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I have to go back to the inn. Not because I want to find an explanation, but because I need to understand this feeling better. How could a place make me feel so trapped? I can't bear this fear forever. The next day, I returned to the inn, my heart pounding. The shop owner was not present. I stood facing the door, reliving every detail, but this time, I decided not to run away. I mustered up all my courage and stepped inside. A cold feeling immediately enveloped me. Musty smell, strange sounds. But this time, I didn't shiver. My room is still the same, nothing has changed. But when I approached the bathroom, the door was opening strangely, as if inviting me to enter. No more knocking on the door, no more footsteps. There was only silence. I walked into the bathroom. The door closed behind me. The faint light from the weak light bulb illuminated the scratches on the door, like the claw marks of a creature I couldn't imagine. Each step seemed to make the air thicker, a feeling of suffocation prevailed. And then I realized, this bathroom isn't just a place to clean up. It contains a secret that I cannot ignore. Have I invited something into my life with excessive curiosity? Or was there something that really clung to me all those long nights, waiting for me to face it again? As I stood there, in the silence, the scratches on the door began to shine strangely. A bone-chilling cold came, and then I heard voices, this time not from the hallway, but from inside the bathroom. "You haven't left anywhere." I tried to convince myself that it was just a natural feeling when I was in a strange place. But I couldn't deny that something was wrong. Something deeper than I can explain. The old walls of the building seemed to be whispering, and as I walked through the long hallway, I couldn't stop looking around. It seemed like someone was following me, but every time I turned around, there was only darkness and silence. I stopped in front of my room, my palms cold as I touched the doorknob. Part of me wanted to keep going, but a cold feeling filled my mind, as if I was standing at a threshold that shouldn't be crossed. I remembered the feelings of the night before, when I had tried to banish thoughts of strange noises, but they came to me like an uncontrollable intrusion. I pushed the door open and entered the room. Dim light from the ceiling light shines on the old gray walls. It feels like this space is not mine. The musty and cold smell of old wood was all around, but I tried not to pay attention to it. I retreated to my room and closed the door, telling myself that maybe I was being too sensitive. But then, there was a gentle knock on the door. Not from the hallway, but from inside the room. My heartbeat accelerated as I stood motionless. That knock on the door, gentle and steady, as if someone was waiting for me to open the door. But I know, deep down, no one is out there. I couldn't understand why I felt so scared, but the urge to check was stronger than ever. With every step, I felt like my every movement was a challenge to something invisible. When I opened the door, there was no one. But the space in front of me was hazy, as if there was some presence lingering in it. The cold air seemed thick, and I could feel a seepage deep into my bones. I looked around, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around and close the door immediately, but another part urged me to step outside and face the shadow that was haunting me. I slowly walked towards the hallway, each step echoing in the quiet space. And then, from a hidden corner at the end of the hallway, I saw a blurry figure passing by. It wasn't a person, but a dark shape with no discernible features. It just passed by like a black streak, something impossible to grasp. I stood frozen, heart pounding, trying to grasp something real, but it was gone. And in that moment, I understood that I was not just haunted by this presence but a part of it. These walls, this hallway, they all belong to something that's been around longer than I thought. I can't go back. Can't escape. Fear was nurtured in the darkness of this house, and now it follows me. The cold still clings to me, and I know, no matter where I go, no matter what I do, that shadow will always follow. Every time it rang, I felt the coldness in the air, as if the sounds had poured silence into the space, making my steps heavier. The laughter seemed to come from nowhere, like it was coming from the cold walls of the building, or from a place I couldn't reach. I don't know if I'm going crazy, but every night I feel more and more that there is someone there with me, something I can't see but can feel. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The laughter this time was different than before. It wasn't just a choked laugh, but something darker, as if a whisper was sharing a dark secret that only I could hear. It rang in my head, over and over again, like an irresistible invitation. I decided to do what I had been avoiding all along, enter the third-floor hallway, where all this laughter started. I held the flashlight in my hand, trembling slightly because of the suffocating silence. As I walked through the deserted hallways, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. The lights in the building had dimmed, as if they were waning from an unidentifiable presence. Every step I took, my footsteps echoed in the empty space, making me feel like I was breaking a dead silence. I approached the door of the examination room. A door like every other door in the building, but this time it was not like the previous ones. There was something wrong, a change in the air, a vague vibration I couldn't explain. Standing in front of the door, I felt like I couldn't continue. But then I heard a soft noise coming from inside. A laugh. This time, it was very close, very clear. I felt its breath, suspended in the air, as if it were waiting for me. I took a deep breath, tried to gather my courage, and reached out to open the door. When the door opened, I saw nothing but darkness. But immediately, the space inside changed. A shadow moved quickly across my field of vision, making me dizzy. And then I heard a voice, soft but clear, as if from someone standing right in front of me, but there was no one there. "Be careful, you shouldn't come here," the voice whispered, not from anyone but from the walls themselves, from this cold space. A paralyzing fear filled me. I turned and rushed out into the hallway, but then I stopped. The laughter started again, echoing in the air, almost unbearable. And I know, I'm not alone in this building anymore. There is something, an entity, a force that exists here, still lurking, still waiting. As I turned closer to the security desk, I felt a distinct difference in the air. There was no longer a quiet space as usual, but a heavy feeling, as if the air had become thick, making it difficult to breathe. The hallway lights were still flickering, but I felt a change in the light. It was no longer normally bright, but had a strange blue-gray tint, as if the light was trying to dim. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the strange feeling rising inside me. The feeling that something is not right still sticks with me. As soon as I stepped out of the security area, I heard that laughter again, but this time it was closer and clearer. It was no longer muffled like before but echoed in the air, echoing from the end of the hallway. My heart raced as I walked towards the sound, unable to control myself even though a voice in my head screamed at me to stop. Flickering lights on the ceiling add to the feeling of dread. With every step I took, I felt like I was getting closer to something unpredictable. The office door in front of me was tightly closed, but suddenly, it opened unexpectedly, automatically. I stopped, my feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. A feeling of tension rose as I looked inside. Inside the room is a mysterious darkness, with no one inside. There were no signs, but I felt a presence. Suddenly, a small noise rang out behind me. I turned around, my heart felt like it was being squeezed. The door to the security room suddenly slammed shut, and I saw a shadowy figure move across the hallway, lingering like an invisible shadow. At this point, I couldn't stand still anymore. I ran, my steps heavy and fast. Only when I stepped out into the main hall and felt the fresh evening air was I able to take a deep breath. The feeling of fear still does not let me go. My every step seemed to be being watched, even though there was no one nearby. I began to wonder if I was truly dealing with something supernatural. Is this a sign of lingering stress and anxiety, or have I actually seen something in this building? That fear never subsided. Every night when I stood in the security room, I waited for the scary event to continue. Closing doors, muffled laughter, darkness in the hallway. Perhaps, this place will never be completely mine. These nightmares are not just dreams in the night. They continued to cling to me even when I woke up, like a feeling that couldn't be washed away, a heavy shadow lurking in the corner of my vision. I can't escape those images. Every time I close my eyes, I see gloomy hallways, half-closed doors, and laughter hidden deep in the darkness. The building seemed to have become a place where time passed without stopping, where my existence merged with the horror of each night. One night, as I continued to work my usual shift, I decided to face it. I cannot live in fear forever. I took the flashlight and determined to walk up to the third floor again. This time, I didn't just go for a checkup but to end these nameless fears. When I opened the door to the third floor, cold air immediately enveloped me, as if this floor was not only covered in darkness but was also a separate space where time stopped. I walked down the hallway, each step making a strange noise, as if someone was following me. The sound of my shoes echoed differently in the terrifying silence. I didn't dare turn back, but every time I passed a door, I felt like someone was staring at me from behind. I couldn't see, but I could feel that look, a look full of coldness and hatred. At the end of the hallway, I suddenly stopped. The light on the ceiling flickered strongly, and I could see something peeking out from behind the office door. A figure, blurry as if it were not a living entity. My breathing became rapid as I approached. My mind was spinning with confusion and fear. I couldn't accept that this was what I had to face, but my legs wouldn't stop. I reached out my hand, my cold hand trembling, about to touch the doorknob. And at that moment, the hallway light went out, leaving me in complete darkness. A dead silence reigned, not a sound. I heard my own breathing, but in this darkness, the sound was like a call in empty space. A laugh, like a tease, rang out again from the end of the hallway, just as I stood frozen, unable to move. That's when I understood that these things were not imagination, not a feeling of confusion due to fatigue or stress. Something is really here, lurking within the walls of this building, acknowledging my presence, daring me to face it. My whole body trembled as I backed away, deciding not to open the door, not to enter it. I turned away, and never looked back again. I hurriedly ran out of the third floor, walked down the stairs, rushing to leave the building. But with every step I took, I felt a force pulling me back, a feeling that that presence was still following me. As I stepped outside, the cool night air filled my lungs, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The building, which seems to have become a part of me, will never let me forget those dark nights, the laughter, and the shadowy silhouettes. I drove all the way out of the city, not daring to stop. In the following nights, I will never forget the coldness in the air, the feeling of being seen, followed, no matter where I was. That building, with all its memories, will always be a part of me, forever a reminder of an invisible presence that no one can understand. I turned around, but there was no one. There's no one. But that feeling, the feeling of a pair of eyes glued to my back, cannot be erased. My breathing was still urgent, each breath becoming dry and rapid, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Instead there was only a thick silence, filling the space. The scratches on the walls still echoed in my ears, each mark slowing my heartbeat another beat. I hurriedly turned around, but my feet still refused to move, seemingly frozen in place. Only the light from the shaking flashlight in my hand continued to illuminate that cold space. Every little noise startled me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, slow steps, not hurried, but clearly someone was approaching me. Strangely enough, they seemed to come from behind me. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. There was nothing but silence, and precarious shadows stretched from the hidden corners, as if everything was hiding, unwilling to reveal itself. I could feel it, something watching, in an inexplicable way. That feeling stuck with me, like a ghost that I couldn't escape. The footsteps never stopped. Everything seemed to pass in a chaos of strange sounds of unknown origin, and I knew I had reached my limit. I took a deep breath and started moving towards the stairs. My legs are still heavy, but I have to leave here. I have to leave before I lose all reason. Every step I took felt like a struggle, as I was forced to face inexplicable feelings. I turned back for one last look towards the hallway, but only saw the dim light from the flashlight, and beyond that, there was a silence as if nothing had happened. I rushed down the stairs, not daring to turn back again, not daring to look into that darkness anymore. When I left the building, I did not feel relief, but a feeling of fear that remained with me. I didn't dare think about going back, even just to check. But I know one thing, something in that building is still waiting for me, still lurking, and I don't know if I can live with this fear forever. However, it cannot be denied that something continues to exist in that space. That feeling overwhelmed me, especially when I worked late at night, during quiet hours, when the building became unbearably quiet. The fluorescent light faded, and the space became vast and uncertain, as if the space were bending and swallowing me. The long nights became a terrible test to my nerves. I wondered if those sounds really existed or were just a product of the fear ingrained in my mind. However, there was no denying the presence I felt every time I entered the quiet hallways. The cold feeling on my skin, the distant laughter, and the invisible eyes that were always there, watching my every step. By this time, I was no longer able to explain. I don't know if I'm haunted by the building itself or by my own fear. But I realized one thing clearly, those strange sounds, invisible figures, and the feeling of being watched were not something I could ignore. They still live inside me, still exist under every layer of paint, behind every wall and behind every closed door. Perhaps, this building is more than just a place where I work. It became a nightmare, a dream that never ended. And although I had never seen its form clearly, I knew for certain that a part of it, some dark part, had touched me. Maybe I will never leave here, even if my body goes somewhere else, but my mind is forever imprisoned in the corridors of fear. But I don't dare go back. Those eyes, if they really existed, were not something I wanted to see clearly. That uncomfortable feeling continued to follow me, as if every move I made it stronger. That look still lurks in my blurred vision, creating a kind of presence that can only be felt, but cannot be fully explained. Every night, when darkness falls and I'm alone in the quiet building, I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. Those gentle sounds, those giggles, still echoed in my ears, like the whispers of something lurking in the darkness. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was still there, in the walls, in the air, waiting for me. I began to realize that I no longer simply lived in this building. It has become a part of me, like a shadow, always following my every move. Strange events, mysterious sounds, all I can do is accept that they have become a part of reality I cannot change. Can I run away from it? Or is it so ingrained in my mind that I can never escape it? Sometimes I wonder if I left, would I be able to find a place that wasn't haunted by that darkness? But even as I tried to escape the building, I knew inside that something was still following me. It changed me. Something unrecognizable, but it was seared into my mind, impossible to remove. And like that, it became a part of me, like a part of every night I lived in fear. I am no longer myself. That building, those hallways, those sounds, it all stuck with me. And now, I can't get out. Every time I close my eyes, I can't help but feel myself returning to that shadow, an untouchable darkness that follows my every step. But every time I walked through the hallway, I couldn't help but feel something different. Mirrors filled the space, reflecting everything in an endless array. And this time, my feeling wasn't wrong. There's something wrong with my reflection. It starts with the small details. Like the times I took my eyes off the mirror for a brief moment, then looked back in and realized that the reflection in there didn't look quite like me. Sometimes my eyes were wide open, but the image in the mirror seemed to be staring back at me coldly, as if something was waiting for me to react. From then on, I couldn't help but feel that presence in the mirror. My reflections, as if they had a life of their own, sometimes appeared at inexplicable angles. One morning, as I stopped in the hallway to adjust my shirt, I saw myself in the mirror. But when I turned around, the image in the mirror wasn't moving like I thought it would. I glanced down the hallway, looked back, and my reflection stood still, eyes staring back at me. That silence kept rising inside me like a cold wave. I began to feel surrounded in this very space. That feeling of reflection isn't just in the mirror anymore. It entered my mind, making me doubt whether I could still control myself. During long nights, I couldn't escape the obsession of those images, the cold looks that were waiting for me in every corner of the house. I felt something watching me, from the reflections, from the shadows gnawing at the space. And every time I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming fear, that what I was seeing wasn't me, but something else, something I couldn't identify. Even though I tried to convince myself that everything was just my imagination, every time I looked in the mirror, I couldn't help but feel that something that didn't belong to me was looking back at me. The image in there seemed to become clearer and clearer, making me feel more and more like I was losing control. During those long nights, I could only wonder if I would ever find a way out of this suffocating space, a space where the mirrors had become a prisoner, constantly reflecting my fear. I'll probably never understand what's going on in this apartment. But one thing I am sure of, I cannot let those images continue to haunt me. My heart was beating fast and irregularly, as if I was about to sink into a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. The feeling of suffocation became more and more distinct, as if the air in this room was being sucked out of my lungs. The fabric on the bed didn't seem to be able to soothe the discomfort coiling inside me. My eyes tried to find a reason to stay calm, but the late-night stillness didn't help. Instead, it just makes the space in the room feel even heavier. At one point, I couldn't stand it anymore and sat up and secretly looked out the window. The wind was stronger, blowing through the window, hissing like a sigh from an invisible world. But what I couldn't stand was the sudden silence. The sound of wind and thunder seemed to stop, leaving only the cold and quiet darkness. I stood up, determined to face whatever was in the hallway, even though I couldn't admit the fact that I was actually scared. I got out of bed and crossed the dark room. As I approached the hallway, I couldn't help but feel someone watching me, as if something was waiting, watching me from the shadows. The reflections, the glass walls, all seemed to no longer be a part of me. When I stood facing the mirror, the cold suddenly curled up in my stomach. All I could do was look at my reflection, then hesitantly noticed something unusual. My image was no longer mine, as if my form was changing, as if a ghost, something fainter, more distorted, was looking back at me through the glass. I felt a cold rise up my spine, and couldn't take my eyes off that image. A sudden panic attack came, but my body couldn't move. I felt frozen in that moment. My eyes widened, but I still couldn't see the truth behind that reflection. My image in the mirror began to move automatically in a different way, no longer under my control. I can't breathe. Every second, I could only hear my own breathing, rapid and choking in my throat. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer the only person in this room. Something else is living in these walls. And I began to wonder if I could escape from this space. As soon as I entered, a feeling of claustrophobia enveloped me. The apartment no longer feels familiar. Each corner of the wall seemed to have its own presence, something waiting, watching me. I can't stand the feeling that I'm surrounded by mirrors that reflect everything, but hide things that I can't see. My eyes couldn't stop from glancing at the reflections, no matter how hard I tried to force myself not to look. I know I can't live like this for long. I can't forever endure the feeling like someone is standing behind me, listening to my every step, observing my every move through reflective glass. It felt as if I had invited something into my life, something invisible but palpable in the air. I began to suspect that these mirrors, these reflective pieces of glass in this apartment, were not just inanimate objects. It was as if they had a soul of their own, something that had long been associated with this space, something old and haunting. It started from the time I saw my reflection, when I realized that it could move independently, that awakened something dark in this space. I can't do anything but avoid looking at them. I know that nothing good will come from facing these things. At night, I couldn't help but feel that presence watching over me. It didn't come right away, but every night, I felt something gently touch me, It was an invisible presence, as if it was gradually invading the room, making it impossible for me to calm down. How many times have I sat on the couch, trying to sleep but couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was watching me through the mirrors, through the walls of the apartment. Unable to escape them, I felt like every step I took was being monitored, every little movement recorded and reflected back as an exact replica of me. And perhaps that's the worst thing. When I think about those mirrors, I can't be sure whether I'm living in reality or just trapped in an illusion that the mirrors themselves create. Am I a part of this space, or has that space become a part of me? I couldn't keep quiet any longer. One night, when the sounds in the apartment became eerily quiet and the darkness suddenly thickened, I decided to do something I had been trying to avoid. I will face those mirrors. Despite the fear rising within me, I was determined to face whatever was lurking in the reflections. I walked through the hallway, my hand tightening on the doorknob. I looked in the mirror again, and this time I didn't back down. Reflections are not just lifeless images. They begin to change. A powerful echo came from my punch, shattering the eerie silence that filled the space. I stood there, my hand still in the slight pain of the punch, and stared into the mirror. Something in my reflection changed, moved, as if it was reacting to my action, as if it had been waiting for me to do it. A shocking feeling spread from my hand through my entire body. My eyes couldn't take their eyes off the image in front of me. And then, it appeared again. In just a second, my reflection changed completely. The empty eyes, which weren't even mine anymore, seemed to widen in mockery, smiling like I'd never seen them before. It's not a smile from me. It's cold, dark, and threatening. It was as if it was seeing right through me, as if it knew all my secrets, all my hidden fears. At that moment, I felt like I was standing in front of something that was not human. My heart was beating so fast that I could feel each beat in my chest, as if it was trying to escape my body. This feeling, a cold and oppressive wave surrounding me, was not just fear but the awareness that I had touched something I couldn't understand. Every cell in my body, every sense screamed that I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't face it. But an invisible force still pulled me closer. My reflected eyes continued to follow me, showing no signs of fatigue, no signs of stopping. They are not mine anymore. Something out there took over me, reflecting back on me in a way I couldn't control. And then, when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice. It is not my voice, nor is it the voice of anyone I know. It was a dry, unrecognizable sound. "You can't escape," the voice whispered. "I can't breathe." A cold feeling ran down my spine, and I wanted to run. But my legs can't move. Something was stopping me, holding me there, as if I were nailed to this very place, this very moment. Then it happened. My reflection not only looked at me but seemed to move towards me in the mirror. And I can't do anything, I can't say anything. I just stood there, stunned, in absolute terror, as it walked out of the mirror and came closer. But every step I took through the hallway, I felt that presence. Although I couldn't look directly at the mirror fragments, I could feel its presence. It's always there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting. Every time I pass by, I have the feeling that it is following me, observing my every step. A feeling I couldn't shake, as if those eyes were still there, no matter how hard I tried to hide them under the fabric. Sometimes, I stop and put my hand on my heart, feeling the strong beat. Every breath is rapid. I cannot escape the feeling that I am living in an invisible darkness, a space in which I am not the only one who exists. The walls of the apartment did not protect me, they seemed to encircle me in an invisible trap, where the fear only grew over time. As the long nights passed, I began to feel as if everything in this room had been covered with its own layer of darkness. The painting hanging on the wall no longer looked at me the same way as before. Each reflection on different surfaces seemed like another variation of me, an undeniable separation. I can't say it's me anymore. Mirrors, reflective surfaces, blurred images that I couldn't explain shattered the reality I tried to maintain. One morning, as light filtered through the window, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my reflection. My eyes dimmed, not because of fatigue, but because there was something in them, a change I couldn't identify. My image, now, looked back at me with derision, as if it knew what I was feeling, what I was avoiding. I stepped back, but the feeling didn't leave. Instead, it grew larger and larger within me, an inseparable presence, a haunting darkness that could not be escaped. No matter how hard I try to deny it, put it out of my mind, it will always be there, waiting, silently, like an indelible reminder. Oh, I wonder how this will end, if there really is an ending. But one thing I know for sure, from now on, I will never again be able to look in the mirror without feeling something different looking back at me. I can only hope that my resilience is enough to help me face that shadow, wherever it comes from, or even, if it is a part of me that I have never dared to look directly at. I don't know when this will end. But I will continue, step by step through the quiet hallways, each day learning not to let fear completely overwhelm me. Still, in the deepest part of my mind, I still couldn't help but wonder, can I really escape all of this? Or like the broken pieces in a mirror, have I broken apart forever, with no way to put them back together again? I chose another route. Longer, harsher, but at least, it doesn't go through a field of sunflowers. The obsession was still there, but the bumpy gravel road forced me to focus on the steering wheel, on every vibration, every pothole that made me stagger. There was no room for the strange figures in my head to interfere. But, even the slight screeching sound of tires gliding over gravel was not enough to dispel the feeling of insecurity creeping in my chest. Every sound, from the engine, from the wind, from the silence itself, startled me. As if there was something behind. Monitor. Wait. That feeling doesn't go away. It followed me like a shadow under the light at the end of the day. Don't speak, don't appear, just quietly, and never leave. The following evenings, I began to feel changes within myself. I no longer felt as confident as before, and every time I left the house, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest, as if an invisible force was pressing down on me, forcing me to turn back. When I look in the mirror, not only do I see my reflection, but sometimes I also notice a slight change in it. My eyes, although still mine, sometimes looked back at me with a different expression. That is not a normal reflection. It was as if someone else was looking at me from inside myself. 2 hours 10 minutes and 13 seconds, one rainy night, as I returned to the gravel road, I saw that figure again, this time more clearly, standing in a hidden corner that I had not seen before. It was a thin, indistinct figure, not a person, but a ghost, a presence that could not be clearly seen but was completely undeniable. As I passed by, I felt a cold wind blowing from that shadow, as if it was moving in my direction. But when I stopped and looked closely, it was gone. I can't explain it, just a shiver rising within me, and I feel like I'm slowly losing the ability to distinguish between reality and what lies beneath its surface. The next night, I decided not to drive. Instead, I walked outside, determined to face what was happening. I know I can't continue to avoid it. The sunflower field has become something very big in my mind. Every time I drive past it, I feel like I'm crashing into an invisible wall, and I can't explain why. I walked out of the house into the dark night, the light of the street lamp reflected the clouds floating in the sky. A cold feeling spread throughout my body, as if the air was condensing. As I got closer, the sunflower field began to appear before my eyes, the tall, upright stems forming a natural wall. I still feel like something is wrong. As much as I don't want to admit it, I know that something beyond my control is going on here. As I continued walking in, I noticed shadows moving among the flowers, as if someone or something was watching me from among the trees. That feeling sent chills down my spine. I stood still, feeling the absolute silence around me. Everything seemed to be stopping, there was no wind, no animals made any noise. Suddenly, I saw a figure standing at the end of the field. It was a fragile, still figure. Not a real person, but a ghost, seemingly part of the darkness. It didn't move, just stood there, as if waiting for me. I felt the air in my lungs choke. My legs can't move. It felt like an invisible force was. I felt the air in my lungs choke. My legs can't move. It felt like an invisible force was pulling me towards it, pushing me to move forward. However, with every step I took closer, I felt like I was entering another space, a space full of threats that I couldn't explain. The feeling was so strong that I could barely breathe. Suddenly, the figure began to move towards me, each step it took making me feel my heart beat harder, as if it was closing the space between us. I couldn't talk, couldn't call for help, there was only deep silence and the movement of darkness. As I got closer, I noticed the look in its eyes. The eyes were shining, as if there was light from within them. And for a moment, I understood that this was not a person or a creature, but something else, a supernatural presence that I could not understand. That feeling of fear seemed to have completely consumed me. I can't go back, I can't go forward anymore. My reason began to be confused, I no longer knew what I was facing. In that moment, all the memories of the sunflower fields, the shadows, and the strange things I had experienced suddenly flooded back, forming an invisible wave that pushed me into another world, where I was inseparable. And at that moment, the darkness in front of me gradually opened, leaving an empty space behind. A cold wind blew, and I realized that I was no longer standing in the field. I was transported into another dimension, a world that I couldn't explain. The vast field seems to never end, the towering sunflowers are like landmarks, guiding me along an invisible path that I cannot retreat from. With every step I took, I felt drawn deeper into the darkness. The flickering figures in my eyes became clearer and clearer, not just hallucinations, but like living things observing me, tracking every move, every breath. I can't go back. Fear took over, but something, an invisible force, kept me going. It was as if something was calling me, inviting me to go deep into the heart of the field, where I knew there was no turning back. That whisper rang out again, this time clearer, as if echoing from all directions. They were vague, unintelligible sounds, but enough to make me feel as if someone was very close, even though I couldn't see them. I felt that presence gradually becoming clearer, as if something invisible was surrounding me, like a ghost hovering in space. A bolt of lightning flashed again, illuminating the whole space, and in that brief moment, I saw strange images flash across my eyes. Long, curved shadows, as if pulled from the darkness itself, stretched out towards me. They were not the shadows of sunflowers, but something else, something inexplicable. I couldn't stop, I couldn't run away, I just stood there, my eyes glued to the approaching dark shadows. Suddenly, those shapes stopped, standing still in the darkness, and a cold wind blew again, accompanied by rustling sounds like the sound of falling leaves. I felt an oppressive stillness envelop me, as if nothing existed but me and those shadows. All surrounding sounds disappeared, and only the sound of my breathing remained, each rapid, choking breath, seemingly not enough to ease the tension in my body. I took another step, and that feeling came again. An invisible gravitational force forced me to keep moving forward. And then, in the scariest moment, I noticed a dark figure standing right in front of me. Not a person, not a creature, but a presence, a ghost that cannot be seen clearly, but that can be felt in the air. It didn't move, just stood there, and I felt an invisible gaze staring at me. I wanted to turn around, wanted to run away, but my body wouldn't listen. I stood there, staring at that shadow, and in that strange moment, I felt like I was standing in another world, an inexplicable world, where shadows could live, could move, and could follow those who refused to back down. And as I started to step back, a laugh, low and muffled, rang out from behind me. It wasn't a human laugh, but something else, something alien and threatening. I hurriedly turned around, but the shadow had disappeared, leaving no trace but dead silence. My heart was pounding in my chest, as if it was about to explode. My whole body is shaking, my legs are weak and I can't stand. I returned to my truck, hurried to get in, started the engine, but everything seemed to slow down. The sun had completely set, and the sky was pitch black. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, chased by something more than human. As I drove through the field again, I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. The darkness behind me felt like an invisible force was clinging to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, no matter how small, startled me. I still felt the gaze of something in the darkness, still watching me. The sunflowers, with their towering stems and bright petals, are now just hideous shadows in my memory. The feeling of fear and anxiety has not left me since that night. I tried to convince myself that everything was just an illusion, the result of prolonged fatigue and stress. But every time I remember what happened, a cold feeling seeps into my bones, and I can't erase the images of sunflowers, strange silhouettes, and sweet laughter, as if they were still watching me. Since that night, I don't dare drive through the sunflower fields anymore. I avoided all roads leading there, even though it took me a lot of time to find another way. However, the strange thing is that even though I stayed away from that place, the feeling of insecurity still did not go away. Sometimes I dream of those flowers, their light bending, then blooming again, as if calling me back. Every morning when I wake up, I look in the mirror, but I always feel something different, like the reflection isn't entirely mine, but something is waiting, watching from behind. Then one night, when I came back, I decided to face it. Even though I felt fear spread throughout my body, I knew I couldn't live in worry forever. I drove to the sunflower field again, but this time I arrived earlier, while it was still light. Although the rain was no longer falling like the night before, the air was still heavy, like a bad sign. I stood in front of the field, where the flowers stood still, not moving at all, as if they were waiting for something. But nothing happened. I stood there for a while, then turned back. Just then, everything seemed peaceful, and I convinced myself that what happened the night before was a psychological phenomenon, or a hallucination from stress. However, when I left there, my heart kept beating strongly in my chest, and a strange feeling enveloped me. The sunflowers, the shadows in that land, continue to haunt me no matter what I do. I started to feel like I was stuck in a circle with no way out. Soon, I realized that I wasn't the only one seeing strange things. I heard stories from other people who drove through that land at night, and they also felt a strange presence in that space, although no one was sure what they saw. Some people say they feel slight movements in the air, strange lights passing by. Some people say they see shadowy figures among the sunflower stalks, like images from the past, trying to get out of their shadows. Day after day, I continued to live in that insecurity. I couldn't erase the images that haunted my mind, the silhouettes in the mirrors, the flowers that followed me in the dim light of the afternoon, the strange laughter like shadows hovering around me. Even though I tried to create a normal life for myself, fear never let me go. And one question still lingers in my mind: can I really escape it, or have I simply entered another world where darkness and light collide? This feeling increased as I walked out the door, the faint light of dawn just enough to illuminate the long shadows of the trees in the yard. Every morning, when I looked outside, the sky outlined a faint outline of light, but today, something was different. The shadows seemed longer, like there was something lurking in them, watching me. I stopped in the middle of the yard, holding my breath when I realized that the sunflowers outside the fence were once again not standing still. Their petals swayed gently, not because of the wind but because of some force I couldn't see. I tried to convince myself that it was just the poor lighting and the fatigue from sleepless nights that was stressing me out. But those flowers, those strange shapes in my peripheral vision, could not be denied. I quickly grabbed my running shoes and went outside, not wanting to look at the field right then and there. Everything felt like it was tightening around me, as if every step brought me closer to something I couldn't understand. Cold sweat still clung to my forehead, but I persisted in continuing. This feeling was strange, as if someone was standing behind me, following my every step. When I had almost reached the safety of the familiar trail, I suddenly heard a very soft whisper, like a soft whisper, but I couldn't identify the source. I turned around, my heart sinking. The shadows between the trees moved, those sunflower stems no longer stood still like before. They were moving, very slowly but surely, as if they were watching my every move. Every time I stopped, they stopped moving. But I felt as if someone was breathing heavily behind me, getting closer and closer. I felt fear like a strong wave, rising in my heart. I can't bear it anymore. I didn't want to keep going past that place. I didn't want to turn around and face what was waiting for me in the distance. Strangely enough, even though I knew I was tormented by inexplicable feelings, I continued to walk, muttering words of comfort to myself. I couldn't stop, I couldn't let fear stop me. But every time the light of dawn filtered through the leaves, I noticed the shadows seemed to become clearer, as if they were looking right at me. Every time I look at them, I feel like a prey, being closely watched. As I continued running, I thought about the times before, about the nights I had been near that field. Every time, I saw those shapes, these strange, inexplicable movements, and now I was no longer sure that they were my hallucinations. I couldn't tell if it was just fatigue or if something was actually watching me from that field. Every morning, when I looked outside, I always wondered if I was the only one who saw that, or if there were others who also felt a strange presence in that space. The shadows and the sunflowers, they are like shadows watching me, still not leaving me. This feeling, as if that shadow was clinging to me, has become a part of my life, like an ever-present reminder every time I step outside. And although I cannot explain it, I know one thing: those shadows are not just images that I see. There was something truly hidden in there, and whenever I thought I had escaped it, I felt something behind me, right in my vision, waiting, wordless, but always present. I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if something was pressing on me, waiting. That feeling didn't go away even when I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen, where the first rays of dawn filtered through the window. Everything seemed normal, but the air was still uncomfortably heavy. That feeling of fear still seems to cling to me, like an inescapable shadow. I prepared for my morning run and quickly headed out, trying to push away the dark thoughts about the strange signs I had seen. But as soon as I walked out the door and looked at the dirt road, I couldn't help but notice a difference. The old signs still stand, but this time they are clearer than ever. Signs aren't just misaligned anymore, they were placed strangely, as if someone was deliberately directing me in a direction I did not want. I felt a cold breeze pass through me, and had a vague feeling that I was no longer walking on a familiar path. Everything seems to be changing. I walked slowly, each step heavier, and the weak light of dawn seemed unable to dispel the tension in the air. The closer I got to the signs, the more I felt like something was watching me. Each sign is like a pair of invisible eyes looking at me from afar. My steps were no longer mine, each step felt heavy, as if there was an invisible force pulling me back. I tried to walk faster, but my legs didn't seem to listen. That feeling, the fear from deep within my mind, gradually became clearer, enveloping me. Signs aren't just rusty sheets of metal anymore, they were like doors leading me into another world, a world I couldn't understand. Every sign I passed pointed in one direction only, toward my house. Something inside me started to twist, and I couldn't stop, couldn't turn back. The shadows from the trees, from the wall, seemed to lengthen and reach towards me. I felt like I was surrounded, watched by something invisible but very clear. That feeling isn't just fear, it was the feeling that I was being hunted, and that something was preparing to defeat me. A gentle wind blew, but as soon as it passed me, I felt a numbing coldness, as if the air around me no longer belonged to this world. I turned around, unable to avoid the sight of the changed signs. Each sign, each time I pass it, is like a step further into a space that I cannot understand. And every time I leave a sign, again, I feel like I've left a part of myself in there. Finally, I approached the last sign. It points towards my house. I couldn't say anything, couldn't think. My footsteps automatically turned back, going back the way I had come, but the space was different. I was no longer on that dirt road, but it seemed like I was somewhere else, a place where the rules had changed. The sky above me had turned from light blue to gray, and the trees around me seemed to be whispering a language I couldn't understand. When I turned around, I saw my shadow on the road, not an ordinary shadow but something distorted, twisted and stretched as if being controlled by an invisible force. I couldn't breathe, and fear rose within me. I certainly can't take it anymore. There is a truth that I cannot deny. I am stuck in an inexplicable loop. Every sign, every shadow, every pass, is a step closer to an inescapable trap. Once again, I turned around and ran as fast as I could, but I felt like I was going backwards, as if my steps couldn't escape this place. It felt like a spiral, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I couldn't take my eyes off that figure. The shape was vague, like a long shadow passing through the wall of light from a street lamp, seemingly without a specific shape. That shadow didn't move at all, just stood there, motionless. Even though I couldn't see its face clearly, there was one thing I was sure of: it was looking towards me. At that moment, I felt a strange tension, as if an invisible force was surrounding me, making me unable to move. 2 hours 24 minutes and 58 seconds, my nerves began to tense up. It felt like a cold wind was running down my spine. My mind was hazy, confusion began to creep in. Is it human, or something else entirely? That shadow has no natural human movement. Those dark shadows stood still, there was no wind, no sound. Everything seemed to have stopped, as if time had been stopped in a moment of menacing stillness. Part of me said it could have just been a pedestrian, a passerby who happened to stumble onto this empty street. But the strange feeling in my heart cannot be dismissed by reason. That shadow was not like the normal people I had met. It does not have any human characteristics. Standing there, it only reflected the faint light from the streetlights, like something empty. And that made me feel like I was facing something inexplicable, unbearable. I can't just stand there forever. But my legs couldn't move, as if they were glued to the ground. I turned my head and looked into my dark room, where the light from the desk lamp was only enough to create dark shadows on the wall. The feeling of fear continued to invade my body. My breathing became rapid, and a strong, irresistible urge pulled me out the door. I gingerly walked out, not knowing what I was doing. It felt like there was an invisible pull leading me out. The shadow still didn't move, but now I could feel it, like an invisible force taking over the space around me. With every step I took, my heart beat faster and stronger, as if it wanted to break my chest. I tried not to look at that shadow, but I couldn't help but turn around again. That shadow was still standing there, and this time, it seemed closer. I started to feel like I was trapped in a game I couldn't get out of. The silence was so heavy that I could hear every beat of my heart. A feeling of fear overwhelmed me, and with every step I took, I felt like I was walking into a trap from which I could not escape. I couldn't understand what was happening, I only knew that a certain presence was occupying this space. The shadow was no longer a faint image. It started moving. Gently, without a sound. But I can feel its every movement. It seems like it is following me, my every step is being watched, dominated by an invisible force. I began to feel like I was surrounded, trapped between this world and another. By then, I no longer knew what to do. I just wanted to turn around, go inside the house and close the door. But my body refused to listen. My feet kept walking towards the shadow, as if an invisible force was pulling me closer. I can't run, I can't stop. I felt like I had completely lost control. And then, in that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something inexplicable. I turned around and realized that the shadow was no longer standing still. It is moving towards me. Slowly, not in a hurry, but each step is like an invitation for me to move forward, to come closer. Part of me said I should run, but my legs wouldn't move. And then I heard a whisper. It wasn't a voice, but it could have been something worse, a gentle whisper, like a call from another realm. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to faint. But I can't leave. The shadow continued to move towards me, and I knew that nothing could stop it. When I looked at that shadow, I found myself facing more than just a reflection. It had changed, distorted, as if I was standing in the dark, another version of myself. I couldn't say a word, but a feeling of paralysis made me unable to move, unable to do anything but wait for that shadow to approach. I tried to stay calm as I held the dash cam in my hand, my palms wet with sweat. Every step I took towards the largest sign was heavy, as if I were entering a cursed land. It felt strange, as if something was watching me from behind, constantly urging me to walk faster. The light wind, although not strong enough to shake the leaves, still carried a strange gloom, as if everything had been plunged into an inescapable darkness. I placed the dashcam in a position facing the sign. The light from my flashlight shone on the rusted letters on the metal, reflecting dimly in the dark night. Every time I adjust the camera, I feel like everything around me is slowing down, becoming strangely silent. It felt as if the space around me was tightening, each shadow on the ground becoming sharper, like invisible fingers were clinging to me, forcing me to face something I couldn't understand. After placing the camera in the right position, I took a step back and stood there, looking at the small screen. I felt the tension increase as the camera started recording. It seemed like everything stopped, only the sound of my breathing echoed in the quiet space. I turned around and looked at the sign, confirming one last time it was still standing in the right spot. Nothing has changed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still waiting for me. I tried to walk a bit, but couldn't take my eyes off the screen. My heart sank as I saw the image of the sign on the screen slowly begin to change. Even though I knew I had the camera in a stable position, the image of the sign in the screen seemed to be moving, tilting towards me. A very small change, but so obvious that I couldn't help but notice it. Suddenly, I felt the icy cold invade every vertebrae of me. How is that possible? The camera cannot change the angle, but the image is changing. I rushed to the camera and pulled it out of position, but the image on the screen kept changing. The sign kept leaning towards me, even though I didn't touch it. This small change made me unable to suppress my fear. I turned around, looked toward the actual sign, and saw it still standing, as if nothing had happened. But I know. I saw it on the screen, and it made me unable to ignore it. I couldn't understand why that change happened, but in that moment, I understood that I was facing something beyond my understanding. A feeling of fear suddenly flared up inside me, and I turned around and walked quickly toward the house, still clutching the camera. I didn't dare turn around to look again. I just felt that presence following me, dragging my every step. At this point, I couldn't escape the thought that something was watching me, and every time I looked at the sign, something strange would happen. I don't know what it is, but I know that it can make me lose control. It felt like I was fighting an invisible presence, but every time I tried to take away one of those signs it was like I was tearing a part of the world around me. A wave of fear washed over me, and though I didn't want to admit it, it was as if it had a hold on me, making it impossible for me to let go. The sound of the sign groaned as if it were protesting, as if an invisible force was holding it tightly, not wanting to let me escape its control. There was a sharp cry as I yanked the sign out of the ground, but then another, louder noise came out. I felt like the entire space around me had changed suddenly. My feelings were frozen, and my heart stopped beating for a moment. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stand there and stare at the sign that was leaning towards me, as if it could stand without my support. Then, before my eyes, the sign seemed to bend and shrink. I couldn't pinpoint how it was changing, but a vibration, an inexplicable force, as if something in the air was hindering me. The signs around me also seemed to start swaying, as if they were moving with a distinct purpose, as if there was something in them. The space around me became stuffy, as if my breathing wasn't enough to supply oxygen. That change, invisible but so obvious that I could feel it through every cell in my body, made me unable to stand any longer. I rushed out of there, leaving the crowbar and wrench on the ground, not bothering to look back. "Run, don't look," just run. I felt as if each step I took was prolonged and stopped by something invisible, as if time and space had been distorted. Every breath becomes a challenge, not because of the lack of air, but because something seems to be invading the space inside me, penetrating me. When I got back to the house, I quickly closed the door and locked all the windows. Even though I know that everything can be just a game of the mind, this feeling, this fear, cannot be easily erased. I lay in bed, but couldn't sleep. Images of signs, shadows I thought I saw, and strange sounds all swirled around in my mind. That is not the fear of a normal person. This was a haunting, an uneasy insistence on the fact that there was something I couldn't understand. I can't explain it, but it's there, watching me, and maybe it was there before. And even though I tried everything to escape it, it seemed impossible to avoid the shadow. The only question I can ask is, can I run away from this? But every time I tried to answer, I felt like I was plunging into a spiral with no way out, where all interpretations of this world were twisted, where every step seemed to lead me only into endless fear. I continued driving in fear, not daring to stop. Every passing car light made me feel like an invisible eye was looking at me from behind, as if I was being meticulously watched from those signs. It's strange, I've never had this feeling driving past them before. Every time I turned to look in the rearview mirror, I saw the faint silhouettes of the signs behind me, even though there was no reason for them to still be present in my thoughts. That feeling grew stronger and stronger, and every time I passed a fork or a sign, I couldn't help but feel some kind of mental pull, as if they were leading me down the path they had set for me. The more I ran, the more I felt like I was lost in another space, not a physical space but a space that these signs could control. I wonder if I'm falling into some invisible vortex where I can't escape. When I went around the last corner, the road back was almost empty, not a single person, not a single car. It's just me and the signs still there, like silent sentinels watching my every move. But then, just when I thought I was free from their restraints, I saw one last sign, in a location I had never seen before. This sign doesn't just stand in the middle of the road like the previous ones. It was placed on a small wall, a barrier wall that made it look like a portal leading into another space. But the strangest thing is that this sign does not point towards my house, but points towards the road that led me out, towards the direction I ran away from. My eyes froze when I looked at that sign. I stopped, trying to find a logical reason for its appearance. Could there be a physical reason for that change? But no, it was just a sign, misplaced, as if it was waiting for me. Waiting to show me that I can't escape what's haunting me. I felt the cold spread throughout my body, and couldn't help but remember the feeling of the shadows in the sunflower field. Am I being pursued? Or is this just the imagination of an exhausted mind? I can't bear it anymore. In a moment of desperation, I turned around and drove off that road, not daring to look back. My heart was heavy, and every sound of the wind, every noise around me made me feel like a shadow was still following me, watching my every step. Every passing car light is like an invisible eye looking at me, looking into my mind, making it impossible for me to escape this obsession. Even though I ran far away from that place, I couldn't help but feel that that shadow was still somewhere inside me, waiting. Those signs, with their eerie presence, haunt me no matter what I do. And perhaps, that is the real fear, something invisible, an inexplicable presence that can follow me at any time, anywhere. And maybe, one day, when I turn around, I'll find those signs still there, always pointing at me, reminding me that I can't escape them. On quiet nights, it's not the light or the darkness that makes me restless, but the sound itself, the sound of silence, as if the surrounding space is following my every breath. This feeling not only haunted me in my dreams, but also when I was awake, when I listened to strange, indefinable noises. The sound of the wind rustling through the window, the gentle whispering in the empty space, all made me feel that I was not as alone as I thought. The next morning, I couldn't decide whether I should return to that dirt road or not. But the urge in my heart made me unable to resist. As I drove through those familiar roads, I couldn't help but feel that something strange was happening around me. The signs still stand there, like silent warriors keeping watch. But this time, they don't just stand still. I could feel an invisible movement, a twist in the air, like the signs were watching me. I quickly left that road, with the feeling that every turn, every glance in the rearview mirror was leading me to something undeniable. Shadows that I couldn't explain, signs standing precariously and facing me, memories mixed with vague fear kept coming back to me. I can't explain why, but something inside me just can't stop. It felt like something was pulling me back, an invisible presence trying to convince me that I couldn't run away. Late at night, I cannot avoid the feeling of being watched. Even though I moved to a new place, the images of the signs still stuck with me. I can feel them in the wind, in the quiet nights, in every lingering darkness, as if they are sparkling in every hidden corner of my mind. And even though I tried my best to deny them, I knew they were still there, lurking in the shadows, never letting me go. I can't help but wonder, can I really get rid of them? Or am I just not strong enough to face something I cannot understand? Was the existence of those signs a sign that there was something deeper, older, waiting for me? These questions have no answers, just a vicious circle in my mind. I realize that perhaps, signs are more than just inanimate objects. They could be signs of something much older, something that exists in the landscape, in the roads, in the land that I cannot yet grasp. And when I look at them, I feel like I'm not just seeing them, but they're also looking at me. That look was cold, invisible, and persistent. It's always there, even when I try to run away. That fear still haunts me every day. Even if I leave that place, even if I try to live a new life, I still can't shake the feeling that those things are still watching me. And perhaps, that is the scariest thing, that it is impossible to escape them. Those signs, those shadows, those mysterious sounds, they were all waiting, watching my every move, reminding me that I could never truly escape them. However, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that clung to me. Every time I took a deep breath, the air in the room still had an unpleasant, salty taste as if something was stuck in the walls. The yellow light is still flickering, each dim light drawing ghosts on the old walls. Suddenly, I felt as if I wasn't the only one in this room. The feeling of being watched is increasingly evident. Every time I turned around, I saw my reflection on the wall, but the strange feeling in those eyes made me unable to feel secure. The house is not only a place for me to rest but seems to be a place for old memories to return. The vague sounds that I thought were the howling of the wind at first, I now clearly know they are not. I heard strange footsteps on the wooden floor, as if someone was walking around the room, very quietly and trying not to attract attention. I tried to convince myself that it was just the sound of screws in the wall or the expansion of wood in the night, but my heart kept pounding. At this time, I clearly felt loneliness not only in space but also in my soul. The next night, I couldn't sleep. The silence became heavy and unbearable. Everything was so quiet that I could hear the metal of the lamp swaying gently in the wind. But in the darkness, I began to hear another sound. Laughter. Although I initially thought it was an illusion, I was certain that the sound was not a reflection of the wind or the lamp. I heard laughter as if someone was sneaking behind the wall, almost silent but still enough for me to notice. My heart pounded in my chest, and an inexplicable fear welled up. I stood up, my limbs shaking, and walked down the narrow hallway of the house. Every step is like a fight with myself, every step feels like a part of me is being pulled back by an invisible force. I approached the wall where I felt something lurking behind. The weak light from the lamp shined on the wall, making me feel even more that something was wrong. That laughter continued, this time clearer, as if it came from somewhere right before my eyes. I walked closer to the window, my hands shaking as I pulled up the curtain. The shadows outside looked like invisible monsters, as if they were waiting for me. That feeling, extreme fear, was something vivid, heavy, hidden deep in every cold wind. I stood there, looking into the darkness, wondering if I could continue living in this place. I can't bear it anymore. Strange sounds, inexplicable shadows, all made me feel like I was no longer myself. The walls of the house seemed to tighten around me, and I couldn't help but feel a presence watching my every move. There was no wind, no sound other than a gentle but terrible laugh. That invisible shadow keeps wandering around, impossible to catch, but it is definitely here. I decided to leave the house. Even though I didn't want to leave in defeat, I couldn't bear it any longer. I hurriedly packed my things and didn't dare look back. When I stepped outside, the space outside seemed larger than ever, but I still felt the tension and obsession from the wooden house still clinging to me. After the meal, I stood still in the kitchen, holding the counter, trying to breathe deeply and regain my composure. The house was still silent, but that silence made me feel even more frustrated. I know, I cannot continue to live like this, in nameless fear, whose origin cannot be determined. Can I leave, leaving everything behind? Or do I have to face what awaits me in this house? I walked closer to the bedside drawer, my trembling hands gently pulled it open again. This time, there was no whisper, no cold breath like last time. But in that absolute silence, I felt something waiting inside, something I couldn't touch but could clearly feel. My eyes looked at the empty drawer, but I still couldn't shake the eerie feeling that someone, something, was monitoring my every move. I pulled the drawer out completely, the weak light of the overhead light illuminating the items inside. Nothing but dust and harmless items. But at that moment, I noticed a small piece of paper lying at the bottom of the drawer, an old, crumpled piece of paper. My heart sank. Why didn't I notice it before? I pulled my hand back, then told myself that maybe this was just something harmless. But I can't stop asking myself, what if it is? I picked up the piece of paper, the dim light from the lamp shining on the paper had faded over time. The handwritten letters looked faint, as if they had been written hastily in a moment of panic. I read out loud in my mouth, "Get out of here. Otherwise, it won't let you go." This reminder not only scared me, but also put me in a state of extreme stress. I felt its tension in every word, as if some presence was warning me, threatening me from the darkness. My hands trembled, the piece of paper crumbled in my palm. I know I can't stay here any longer. But we can't leave without knowing the truth behind all of this. A confrontation, a decision must be made. With no other choice, I decided to leave this wooden house. But right before I walked out the door, a cold wind blew past, making me stop. I turned my head to look, my heart beating loudly in my chest. The wooden wall behind me seemed to change, there was something in it, a shadow, a fleeting movement that crossed my eyes that I couldn't explain. I took a deep breath, walked to the door and went out, trying to stay calm. There was no one outside in the vast space of the forest. It feels like an invisible danger is waiting for me, silently, quietly. And I know that no matter where I go, it will still follow me, silently waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Stepping out of the land, I felt cold eyes following me from the darkness. Every time I take a step, I feel it closer. But I can't stop walking, I can't turn back. Maybe, the only way is to leave completely, leaving everything behind. But we can't forget that there are things that even if you leave, they will still follow you, always. Those sounds, those shadows, they don't give up on me easily. And no matter where I go, that feeling will always be with me. I stood motionless, my eyes glued to the reflection in the mirror. It felt like there was someone standing right behind me, even though I couldn't see anything in the thick darkness. The dim light from the bathroom lamp reflected my face, but behind me, that space seemed hazy and unclear. I could feel a presence, vague but unable to grasp it. My heart was beating so fast, so strongly that I could feel it vibrating in my chest. Cold sweat stuck to my skin, my palms were wet. The shadow in the mirror became more distinct, and although I tried to look closely, I could not determine what it was. I took a step back, but feeling uneasy, the shadow seemed to move with me. That feeling was so strong that I couldn't bear it any longer. I turned my back on the mirror, walked out of the bathroom, and ran toward the living room. The space in the wooden house became more cramped and stuffy, as if everything around me was tightening. An unknown fear rose within me, making me unable to think of why I felt this way. I wanted to leave, but curiosity, an irresistible urge, made me turn back. I looked in the bathroom mirror again, where my reflection was still standing there, but this time, I felt like it wasn't me. A confusion, a strange feeling of distortion in the mirror made me shiver. I stood still, not daring to breathe loudly, my eyes never leaving the mirror. Everything is so quiet that it's scary. Suddenly, I saw a shadow flash behind me in the mirror. Something moved gently, not my shadow, but that of another shape. I took a deep breath, trying not to let fear take over. But it's not easy. A cold chill ran down my spine. I tried not to look anymore, but it seemed like my eyes were drawn to that shadow. The whispering started again. This time, it was clearer, sharper, like an invitation, a familiar sound, but I couldn't remember where it came from. I couldn't recognize the language, but the sound kept echoing in my head, spinning endlessly. My eyes opened wide, looking at my reflection in the mirror, while the shadow moved strangely, vaguely but very real. I tried to look away from the mirror and take another step back, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I can't move. I can't stop. As each moment passed, the shadow in the mirror grew closer and closer to me. It felt as if it was invading the entire space around me, filling me with a quiet yet strong, indispellable presence. A laugh rang out, not from my mouth, but from somewhere deep in the mirror. At first, it was just a soft laugh, then it quickly turned into a manic laugh, filled with mockery and insecurity. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer facing myself in the mirror. It's not me anymore. That shadow, something else, was looking back at me from the mirror. I screamed, but my scream was stuck in my throat. I can't escape that feeling. My hands were shaking, I tried to retreat, but every time I looked in the mirror, the black shadow in there got closer, swirling around me like a never-ending nightmare. The shadow in the mirror was no longer a mere reflection, it was alive, real, a living being waiting for me to enter. I no longer have the strength to endure. It felt like an invisible force was pulling me closer. My eyes couldn't leave the mirror, and I knew, if I looked for one more second, I wouldn't be able to escape. The shadow in the mirror is no longer an illusion. It's becoming a part of me, and I'm afraid I'll be swallowed up in it. And before I could do anything, before I could realize what was happening, that shadow laughed again, echoing through every corner of the house. It was waiting for me, ready to welcome me into its own darkness. I can't bear it anymore. Everything in this wooden house makes me feel like I'm living in an unreal reality. Seeing the drawer back in place, I realized with shock that maybe I hadn't actually done anything to get rid of it. This feeling, the inexplicable fear, the inaudible whispers, the blurred images, persisted, never leaving me. The whole house was like a trap, tightening around me, making it impossible for me to escape no matter how hard I tried. The final decision was clear in my mind. I cannot continue to live in this space, where each shadow seems to have a life of its own, where each object seems to contain a part of something terrifying. I stood up, without once looking back into the drawer, and began packing my things. Every step I took, every time I touched my suitcase, I felt as if something was watching me from behind. Everything in the wooden house was still strangely quiet, and I had the feeling that the surrounding space had become ghostly silent. The cold air made me hurry, but every move I made was as if someone was watching me from the darkness. I left everything behind, not once looking back, carrying all the fear and doubt of what I had just experienced. When I stepped out of the wooden house, a strange feeling of relief spread over me. But as soon as I stood in front of the door, ready to leave, I felt a chill run down my spine. Like a blow to me, I turned around and saw, in the distance, shadowy figures in the wooden house, like twisted figures on the wall. They cannot be hallucinations. They were standing there, following my every move. as if they were watching and waiting. I hurriedly got into the car, took a quick breath and quickly drove off the dirt road. However, the feeling of being watched did not leave me. Every headlight of the car going in the opposite direction made me shiver, every rustle of the wind in the window startled me. I felt as if the cabin was still behind me, continuing to peer at me through every dark corner, waiting for me to return. But I'm not going back. I drove faster, trying to put everything behind me, leaving the wooden house behind, without leaving any traces. However, I know, a part of me is still there, in the house with the shadowy figures and whispers. I can't shake them, no matter how hard I try. Something, a part of me, was still trapped in the darkness of the cabin, and I wasn't sure if I could escape forever. As for me, I can't go back there again. But in every dream, in every quiet moment, I still feel that presence, still hear the echoing whisper. I may have escaped, but somehow, I still feel they are chasing me, always close, always watching. And so, the truth remains with me: once you step into places that don't belong to you, once you witness something inexplicable, you can never truly leave them. Those shadows and whispers will follow you forever, whether you like them or not. I pulled my hand back immediately, feeling a cold run down my arm. A strange feeling enveloped me, like I had just touched something that was not of this world. I couldn't explain the tension in the air, couldn't determine whether it was because I was tired or if there was something truly lurking in this cellar. That feeling made me uneasy, as if I had just hit a line that I couldn't cross. I looked around again, trying to find a logical reason for the presence of those shapes on the wall, but all I saw was an empty space and a weak light bulb swaying overhead. The plumbing made inexplicable noises, as if something was moving somewhere within the walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that an invisible creature was watching me. I quickly turned around, not wanting to stay another moment in that space. The feeling of being trapped in the darkness of the cellar, with strange shapes looking at me from within, as if they knew I was here and were just waiting for me to touch them again. As I walked back up the stairs, I couldn't escape the feeling that those images were still chasing me, following me with every step, lurking in the shadows of the walls. At this point, the house is no longer a safe place. It became a stuffy space, full of mysteries that I couldn't understand. I went out, breathing a sigh of relief as I walked out of that space. But as soon as daylight entered my eyes, another cold feeling enveloped me. I couldn't get rid of the image of those strange circles, as if they were engraved deeply into my mind, gnawing away every little part of my reason. I still can't explain what happened, but I know one thing for sure: something not of this world was lurking in that cabin, and a part of me is forever trapped in its darkness. I couldn't help but feel the tension in my body as the sound continued, like an unmissable rhythm, echoing steadily in the darkness of the house. The knocking sound was no longer gentle, it was strong and solid, each time it rang, making the surrounding air seem to freeze. Strangely enough, even though I knew there was no one in the basement, I still felt an invisible presence watching my every step. That strange feeling didn't stop at the noises. The drawings on the wall seemed to begin to change again, the circles glowing dimly, as if they were flickering, inviting me closer, drawing me into something I couldn't explain. I wondered if I was caught up in some kind of hallucination, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Those images are really changing. And not only that, the sound also changes in a strange way, each beat like something is waiting. I sighed and decided I couldn't continue living with this confusion. I have to face it, even though I don't know what to do. Taking a deep breath, I walked back up the stairs, heading down to the basement. The knocking sound still rang out regularly, but this time, I no longer felt as scared as before. A feeling of resolve began to build within me, as if I was ready to face the truth, no matter how scary it was. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the dim lights from the circles glowed more clearly. I took out my flashlight and shined the light through the drawings, hoping to find a reasonable reason. But the light only made them clearer. Cracks in the paint, thin diagonal lines through the circles, as if they were alive, breathing, as if there was something inside. I could almost hear a faint whisper, as if an invitation for me to come closer. That attraction makes me unable to stop. I slowly walked towards the drawings, my hands shaking as they touched the nearest wall. As soon as I put my hand on it, a strong electric current ran through my body, startling me. My heart was pounding, and everything around me seemed to disappear. I felt like I was sinking into another dimension, where those drawings were not just part of the wall, but a door to a world I couldn't understand. My vision began to blur, and I felt strange movements in the space around me. The figures seemed to begin to change shape, they twisted, transformed, as if they were alive. Something invisible was pulling me in, a presence that I couldn't see but could clearly feel, as if it was waiting for me to enter its world. But then, a loud noise suddenly interrupted my thoughts. A sigh rang out in the air, causing me to jump back in surprise. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I looked around, there was nothing, no one. Silence reigned again, and that breathing sound seemed to be just a product of paranoia. With one last look at the wall and those strange circles, I turned around and quickly walked out. This time, I can't explain the heavy feeling in my heart. A part of me still remained there, in the darkness of the cellar, with the strange, inexplicable patterns and sounds. And even though I left, the feeling of being watched didn't let me go, as if I had awakened something in that house that could now not be returned. As I left the house and entered the daylight, I told myself that I would never go back. But deep down, I knew that the strangeness, the sounds, the drawings, and the coldness in the air would forever haunt me. I escaped, but did I really escape at all? That whisper did not let me go. Even though I left the basement, even though I ran away from the lure of those strange drawings, they continued to haunt me. During quiet nights, when I close my eyes, I feel their presence again. Those swirling circles not only exist on the walls, but seem to have penetrated my mind, becoming a part of me, an indelible part. When I returned to the house one night, I no longer felt completely at ease. I didn't dare look at those walls, didn't dare look at the signs of that mysterious existence. Every step I took in the house was enveloped by a heavy feeling, as if someone or something was watching me, observing my every move. I can't escape the nightmares. In my sleep, I dreamed that I was drawn into those circles, drawn into an endless space, where each circle led me to a dark part of myself that I had never wanted to explore. Those sounds, the steady tapping, the incomprehensible whispers, always echoed in my head. And then, I woke up, drenched in sweat, feeling like something was still watching me, even if I couldn't see it. I tried everything to calm down. I lit candles, opened the window to listen to the sounds of nature, and let the fresh air dispel the confusion in my mind. But no success. Those feelings don't go away. I began to doubt everything, even what I thought was reality. I saw those symbols, and they kept appearing in my head, even when I didn't want to think about them. One day, I ran into the caretaker of that house again, who talked about renovating the basement. He looked at me with a strange look, as if he knew what I had been through. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and nodded as if everything had been predetermined. I couldn't help but feel that he knew something that I couldn't understand. Day after day, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Every step I take in the house, every small movement, is placed under the invisible gaze of some force. And it seems, it's just waiting for me again, for me to turn around and face what I started. So I decided to find the answer. But I don't know if that answer will truly set me free, or if it will only lead me to a dark abyss from which I cannot return. That feeling of quiet, although pleasant, brought a new fear. Everything returned to normal to the point where I could almost convince myself that I had imagined it all. But in the back of my mind, I knew that wasn't the case. I couldn't ignore the feeling of something I felt under the layers of paint and cold walls. That feeling haunted me even when I returned to everyday life. The images of glowing circles still did not let me go. Every time I look in the mirror, I feel like something deep inside, somewhere in the darkness, is waiting for me. Maybe I was doing everything right, but maybe I was just scratching the surface of something I couldn't understand. Day by day, I try to live normally. However, fear has become a part of me, a long shadow that follows no matter how hard I try to avoid it. I started to notice a change in myself. Every sound, every movement startled me. The feeling of insecurity is no longer an event that only happens in quiet moments, but has become a part of every moment of my life. I don't dare face those symbols directly anymore, although I still feel them in the air, like a silent but undeniable presence. Sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I feel my eyes lost in those strange features, as if I'm seeing a part of myself that I can't understand, a part that has been changed forever. I can't be sure that I've actually gotten rid of them. Doubt, fear, and curiosity still haunt me. Even when I tried to live a normal life, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I couldn't see, but was always there, waiting. The feeling was undeniable, as if an invisible entity was following me. Every time I slowed down, the headlights behind me seemed to recede a little, but never left. I could feel its presence, even though I couldn't see anything but the dim lights in the rearview mirror. That shadow just followed, patiently, never leaving. I started to feel a strange tension, as if I wasn't just driving on this deserted road. Something was there, watching my every move. I couldn't stop to confirm, but I could feel it, with each heavy breath in my chest, a fear waiting to erupt. Why didn't that car pass me? Why does it always keep such a fixed distance, not too close but not too far? Even though I tried to stay calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being chased. My eyes scanned the rearview mirror again, and I couldn't help but notice the reflection of that headlight still present, behind me, unchanged. I pressed the accelerator a little, but it just strangely backed away, neither going away nor getting closer. Every minute that passes makes me feel more tired, not only physically but also mentally. Anxiety kept rising inside me, like a storm about to collapse. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. Only when that car seemed to disappear did I feel a little relieved, even though I knew full well that that feeling had never passed. It still clings to me, waiting, just for a moment when I don't pay attention. By the time I got home, I couldn't shake that feeling of tension. Even with the door closed, the light in the room still seemed to make me feel unsafe. Shadows of unknown origin keep playing around me. The feeling of someone standing behind me, watching me, has become a part of this life. I still live in nightmares and shadows, impossible to identify, but definitely there, always waiting to make me feel that I can never truly escape. So I lived like that, keeping calm on the outside, but there was always a part of me that clung to the memories of those circles, those voices, and that look, the invisible look from behind. I felt a cold and tense feeling rising inside me, from deep in my chest to my fingertips. That headlight, maintaining its distance but never separating, followed me like a ghost. I couldn't understand what was happening, but it felt clearly like a conscious presence, not random. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but that light kept lingering in my sight. I gently pushed the accelerator again, hoping that it would pass me, but it just listened, watching. Everything around started to fade away. The road, the street lights, all seemed distorted by a terrifying silence. Every movement of the car behind me, even for just a moment, made my heart jump in fear. I can't convince myself that this is just a coincidence anymore. Something about that headlight, the way it always followed me, made me feel like I was being hunted. My heart rate skyrocketed and my throat went dry. Even though I told myself I should just keep driving, that I would leave it, it didn't leave. It was still there, following me, an invisible presence lurking in the darkness. I could feel the tension from head to toe, as if something was right behind me, waiting for me to turn around or do something wrong. I can't make this car pass. It doesn't get past me. I pressed hard on the accelerator, but the car maintained a constant distance. There's really no way to explain this feeling. I've driven on these roads thousands of times, but this time was different. It is not the feeling of a car running behind. It is the feeling of something watching, patient, not challenging but certainly not wanting to leave. Then, without warning, the headlights seemed to decelerate and suddenly came on. Like a reminder that I'm here, with me, still watching. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, hoping to see the car clearly, but there was nothing. The road is still empty, not a soul in sight. It's too late to explain, too late to say I just imagined everything. That feeling is still in me, like a trace, something indelible. When I arrived home, I couldn't get out of the car right away. My fingers were still clenching the steering wheel, cold sweat covered my hands, my heart was still pounding. I have returned to a safe place, but a part of me still cannot escape that shadow. The shadow still follows me, still waiting quietly. Not tonight, not tomorrow night, but I know that one day it will come closer, and I will have to face it. That feeling, an invisible and inexplicable presence, wrapped itself around me in an inescapable grip. Every step I took seemed to prolong the fear, but that headlight hung on, as if it never intended to leave. Even though I tried to convince myself that it was a coincidence, some car going in the same direction, my instincts couldn't ignore the impropriety in all that was happening. Driving under its light, I felt like I was being watched. Every thought, every reaction in my body sped up. There was nothing I could do but keep my hands on the wheel and hope that it wouldn't get too close, but it always did, watching from behind. I tried to think of plausible explanations, perhaps a passing car with a broken headlight, or a hallucination caused by fatigue, but every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, that headlight was there, a reminder that something was completely inexplicable. At this moment, everything seemed to slow down, the atmosphere in the car became stuffy, and the feeling that I was being followed became even stronger. I know, I can't stop. Not when there's something out there, behind me. Not when I feel this insecurity overwhelming everything, making it impossible for me to focus on anything other than the nameless shadow that's chasing me. I no longer want to know why that car didn't pass, never passed. It kept maintaining that distance, letting me worry, letting me feel that it was watching my every move, controlling every movement. This feeling is so uncomfortable, as if I am falling into an invisible trap, unable to escape. Every time I stepped on the accelerator to push the car faster, the other headlight reflected in the mirror, never passing me, but also refusing to let go. The last time I saw those headlights, I tried not to let fear control me. I focused on the road, telling myself to stay calm. But before long, that car was almost filling my back window, that white light invading the space inside the car. I couldn't see anything but blinding light, and my heart was beating so hard I felt like it might burst. Every question, every doubt, every unexplainable fear kept swirling around in my head. Why is it like this? Why am I being pursued like this? The light never backed away, as if it was on purpose, as if it was watching me, patiently waiting for some mistake, some fear that would make me lose my composure. I felt isolated, trapped in a game I couldn't understand. Thoughts about my safety, about how I would escape this situation, gradually gave way to a deep fear that perhaps I could not escape its control. And when that car finally disappeared from my sight, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was still there, waiting, never giving up. Each drop of rain hitting the windshield felt like invisible fingers tapping me, adding to the feeling of being watched. I can't stop. Every time I drove past that area, my body tensed up, as if an invisible wave was pushing me forward, not allowing me to turn back. But today is different. The storm was rising, the thunder like the roar of an unpredictable creature, threatening to swallow everything. In that frenzy, I couldn't help but feel like someone, or something, was standing behind me, chasing me in the dark. The headlights flashed in the rearview mirror, startling me. That light was not the same as before. It was not just a lifeless light from some car on the road, but something strong and gloomy, as if created from the darkness itself. I tried not to look in the mirror, but when the light came on again, I couldn't resist the urge. At this point, I was no longer just afraid of that car, I'm afraid of myself. Afraid that there was something invisible but completely present, a presence that I couldn't understand, that was following me. Each ray of thunder seemed to separate from the darkness, shining on the empty road. I felt like I was trapped in a living nightmare. The other headlight still kept that distance, neither coming closer nor leaving, just flashing in the rear-view mirror. This strange feeling, an inescapable clinging, welled up inside me. As I rushed forward, I felt an invisible force pulling me closer. Even though I stepped on the accelerator hard, the light followed closely, as if the other car and I were chasing each other in a crazy game that no one could win. There was no sign of a car passing me. No engine, no sound of wheels. It just hung there, following me every kilometer, making me unable to stop, unable to escape. My rational mind wanted to convince me that it was all just a freak accident of light, something easily explained, but deep in my mind, I knew that something was wrong. Everything around me started to become blurry, as if I was no longer in this world. Reality begins to crack, and only that headlight remains steady, the only point that still truly exists. When I arrived home during that storm, I felt like a part of me had been ripped apart. I tried to shower and take a long nap, but my sleep was filled with nightmares. The bright headlights appeared again, this time not just a light, but a ghostly dance, inviting me into endless darkness. The more I think about it, the more I realize I can't escape it. It entered my life, drawing me into a game I couldn't control. And every night, when darkness falls again, I feel that presence will always be there, waiting for me, watching me, threatening me. And then, one night, when everything seemed to be falling into silent darkness, I could no longer bear it. The feeling of being watched, the invisible light I had been running from for the past weeks, was no longer simply a nightmare. It became my reality, invading every corner of my mind and body. I returned to that highway, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. The storm is no more, but darkness still covers, and that deserted road still waits for me. I was no longer running, no longer hoping to escape something I couldn't understand. When those headlights appeared in the rearview mirror again, I didn't bother to glance again. I stopped. The headlights came on, but this time there was no fear, no panic. I no longer have to run, no longer have to push myself into a meaningless race. I waited, I looked straight at it, facing it. And then, as if by something unpredictable, the light went out, as if it had all been an illusion. That's not a car. It's not something that can be explained by reason. It is a presence, something invisible, impossible to touch, but felt. And when it was gone, I felt not relief, but closure, final liberation. I returned to my house, no longer hearing the sound of the engine behind me, no longer feeling like I was being watched. But deep down, I know that I will never forget that look, that feeling of not being able to escape that presence. It will forever stay, like a scar on my mind. And no matter how many days pass, every time the darkness falls, when I look in the mirror or when the quiet road stretches out in front of me, I still feel like there is something out there, looking at me, waiting. That look, that light, will never completely disappear.